Hey everyone, welcome to another adventure. Today, Audio Novel presents Police in Los Angeles by the amazing Mutter. Supporting talented authors like Mutter is what keeps these incredible stories alive. Be sure to check out their Patreon or join their Discord, links are in the description. And if you love audiobooks like this, visit my Patreon for more. Your support helps bring these stories to life. Thanks for being part of this journey. Let's dive into the story. Police in Los Angeles. Chapter 76, Are You Short on Money? Of course, such safety issues didn't concern him. The two of them cleaned up Hannah's attic and then went back to Jack's place. They made something to eat and chatted over dinner. Coming from a military family, Chris was highly adaptable to different diets. Even though the steak Jack cooked wasn't of the highest quality, Chris ate it with great enjoyment. Are you short on money? Chris's question caught Jack off guard. Following his gaze, Jack saw the small, old refrigerator in the kitchen, which seemed out of place in the newly renovated space. Ah, it's all right. My salary as a patrol officer covers my daily needs. My expenses aren't high, but I recently took out a loan to buy this house, so money is a bit tight. These old appliances need to be replaced slowly. I don't like having too many debts. Jack suddenly remembered his treasure and pulled out a USB drive, handing it to Chris. This has 30 bitcoins. Sell them for me when the price goes up in a couple of years. I'm about to join the FBI and don't want any financial issues cropping up. Chris hesitated for a moment, instinctively taking the USB drive, but his expression showed discomfort. At the current price of $6,000 to $7,000 per bitcoin, Jack's serious demeanor felt a bit excessive to someone used to dealing with billions in cash flow. Don't look at me like that. I'm trusting you with my entire fortune. Jack might be poor now, but he was confident. If he didn't want to attract too much attention, with his master-level healing skills, he could easily make money treating the rich or even starting a cult. Material needs were no longer urgent for him. You don't want to take my money, and that trading company just started, so splitting profits now doesn't make sense. But if it's IRS money, do you mind? Chris, feeling a bit embarrassed by the contrast between Jack's mysterious aura and his current lifestyle, thought for a moment and made a suggestion. Jack's eyes lit up immediately. His previously indifferent demeanor shifted to a more pragmatic one. Who wouldn't want legitimate income? If there's one department in the USA that even the FBI wouldn't mess with, it's the IRS. A friend at the IRS is in some trouble, and it's connected to LA. I can have him come to you for help. Jack was puzzled. I'm just a regular patrol officer. How can I help the IRS? And why would the IRS pay me? They have ways to make the LAPD cooperate unconditionally. Chris didn't elaborate, clearly confident in this matter. You'll understand when my friend from the IRS contacts you. As a supervisor, he has that authority. Jack nodded in understanding, then brought up investigating the Kleiner Foundation. The timing was right, as this criminal group was about to lose official support temporarily. If they didn't act now, things would get complicated and dangerous once the group allied with another politician. Chris promised to provide results soon and then left, eager to see his closest partner, Justin, also receive treatment quickly. A week later, Jack was about to clock out when he received a mysterious phone call. Jack DeVore. He said I could trust you completely. Hearing the somewhat elderly voice on the phone, Jack was momentarily stunned, then realized that he referred to Chris. Yes, that's correct. I have a problem that needs your help. I'd like to meet privately. You choose the time and place, but it's best if it's today. Jack glanced at the time, it was just past 6 p.m. How about my place? 8:30 p.m., we can talk over dinner. Since the IRS could easily check his records, being open about it might help build trust. I've heard you're a good cook. I look forward to tasting your cooking. It was clear the caller had done his homework. Jack smirked and drove to Wegmans supermarket. If he wanted to impress this important figure, he decided to make an expensive French dinner. That evening, while preparing dinner, Jack video chatted with Hannah. His sweetheart had been stuck at Quantico for almost 3 months now. The training was tough, but she still made time to chat with him every night before bed. Despite being apart for so long, Jack felt their relationship had grown closer. The girl, emboldened by the distance, said all sorts of things in the video chats. They were currently talking about her arch-nemesis, Tyler Kelly. That little tramp hasn't tried to seduce you recently? Hannah asked, skeptical. Maybe she's given up. It's been almost 2 months. I haven't seen her since the New Year's Eve party. You know I don't even have a TV at home, let alone watch Channel 8 news. She's definitely plotting something. I know her too well. She would never give up easily. Hannah seemed to have deep-seated grievances. If you didn't mention it, I'd have forgotten to ask. How deep is your grudge against her? Jack, never one to miss out on juicy gossip, was curious. He had recently enjoyed the drama between Angela and Wesley over meeting his parents, almost grabbing popcorn to watch. She stole my crown at the graduation dance because I didn't have a date. Ah. No wonder the hatred was so deep. Jack immediately joined his girlfriend in condemning the enemy. Loyalty was crucial at this moment. Hannah, reminiscing, still felt indignant, but soon she started whining sweetly to Jack. Darling Jack, you have to help me get revenge on her. How? Give me a plan, and I'll execute it. We'll make sure she knows not to mess with us. Jack drizzled the plum sauce and red wine reduction over the seared foie gras, placing it in the infrared warmer, while sweet-talking his girl. Hannah, seeing his nonchalant attitude, pouted in dissatisfaction, then her eyes gleamed mischievously, and her voice turned even sweeter. Why don't you make her fall in love with you, then after she boasts about it, we'll go to the high school reunion together and humiliate her in front of everyone. Jack's forehead broke out in black lines. This sounded like a plot from a third-rate American teen drama. Shaking off the goosebumps, Jack knocked on the phone camera with a spoon. I think you've been away from home too long. Speak properly. That tone isn't like you. If you keep this up, I'll have a good chat with Mrs. Anderson. Mrs. Anderson, Zoe's mother and Hannah's aunt, was the only person besides Zoe who could control Hannah. As their relationships grew more complicated, Zoe had long lost her previous dominance over Hannah. Chapter 77, The Old Fox from the IRS. Hannah's half-joking, half-testing little scheme didn't succeed, but she hung up the video call satisfied. Jack continued with his French cooking. Preparing beef bourguignon was somewhat complex, and he couldn't find authentic Charolais beef, so he used high-quality tenderloin and made some adjustments to the recipe. If you exclude extremely expensive ingredients like black truffles and caviar, many French cuisine ingredients are quite affordable. Jack chose to focus more on the cooking process, otherwise, simply boiling a genuine Breton lobster, French blue lobster, would also count as a fine meal. Next was French onion soup, followed by Niçoise salad and a Basque cherry cake. Jack took a satisfied breath, the timing was perfect, just waiting for the guest to arrive. Although his advanced cooking skills couldn't create dishes that shimmer with legendary golden light, they were enough to satisfy most gourmet critics' picky tastes. At exactly 8:30, the doorbell rang. A thin, elderly man with a bald head and wearing a formal suit appeared at Jack's door. Seeing the old man, Jack couldn't help but laugh inwardly. First, Batman left, and now Commissioner Gordon arrived. He wondered if he could gather all the famous characters from the DC and Marvel universes for a couple of mahjong tables in the future. That would be interesting. Sorry to intrude, Mr. Tavor. I'm Ray King from the Treasury Department. The old man introduced himself seriously, unaware of Jack's fanciful thoughts. It's an honor. Please come in. Seeing the god of wealth arrive, Jack's smile became even more welcoming. Ray King walked into the living room and noticed Jack's unusually styled Eight Immortals table, a hint of a smile appearing on his face. I didn't expect Mr. Tavor to be so multi-talented. This table has a unique craftsmanship. Just call me Jack. It's just a small hobby of mine. The kitchen cabinets are also my own handiwork. The old man had a keen eye. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Though his woodworking skills weren't yet advanced, he had put a lot of effort into making this table, using sturdy oak and carving intricate patterns, which the old man had spotted at a glance. I often appraise antique furniture. I can see that although this table's craftsmanship is still a bit immature, it has its unique style. As the saying goes, a gift demands something in return. This old fox's flattery indicated that the trouble must be significant. Jack took out 2 plates of pan-seared foie gras from the warmer. Wesley, the rich second generation, had brought a bottle of wine from the Harlan estate, which now came in handy. Although it was only the second label, the maiden, it was still quite valuable. They had sealed it up after only a slight tasting. "This is the most delicious French foie gras I've ever had on the West Coast." King squinted his eyes in appreciation, giving a sincere compliment. Although Jack didn't strictly follow the 5-course French dining process, he covered all the bases: appetizer, soup, hot entree, main course, and dessert. After tasting the final dessert, Basque cherry cake, King couldn't help but sigh. "It's a pity you're an LAPD patrol officer instead of a Michelin restaurant chef." The old man realized his unintended slight and quickly added, "Of course, I don't mean to belittle your profession, but as an old foodie." Jack smiled as he brewed a pot of black tea, setting out milk and sugar, and motioned for him to help himself. "I understand what you mean. Maybe someday when I'm no longer a cop, I'll consider opening a restaurant. My home is always open for you to visit. In fact, compared to French cuisine, I'd rather treat my guests to a variety of Chinese dishes." "I'd love that. Before we get to the main topic, could you tell me about your relationship with him?" Ray King sipped his tea, his gaze friendly but with a hint of scrutiny, perhaps due to his professional nature. Talking with someone of his age required utmost caution. It wasn't about trust but about avoiding misunderstandings with this old fox. After careful consideration, Jack spoke. "To be precise, I'm Chris's doctor, currently providing him with psychological counseling. I'm also one of his few friends." Jack deliberately used a more familiar name for Christian Wolf. In the original series, Ray King and the accountant had a subtle relationship. Although they cooperated and knew each other's backgrounds, they only met once and were always wary of each other. King was a bit surprised by this answer. He knew Jack had many talents but didn't expect him to be a good cook and have doctoring as a side job. "Don't misunderstand. I don't practice medicine, nor do I charge fees. It's just some traditional skills passed down in my family." Jack took out a packet of silver needles to show him, with a bit of psychological suggestion. "It helps him sleep better." Ray King showed a look of sudden realization, though it was unclear if he truly believed it or was just pretending. Jack didn't want to engage in convoluted traditional medicine theories with this cunning old fox. He didn't know much about this mysterious IRS supervisor, and talking too much could backfire, especially if the other party was knowledgeable. Nowadays, you encounter all kinds of people. In his past life, he even met a Canadian girl online who could type Chinese fast and discuss political theories as fluently as he could. "Chris mentioned you had some trouble. I don't understand what an IRS matter needs a small patrol officer for, but since you're his friend, I'll do my best to help." His implication was clear: my relationship with him is closer than yours, so there's no need to test me. "You're the one asking for help." Ray King's wrinkled old face showed no sign of embarrassment and seamlessly continued. "I have a subordinate who went silent during an undercover infiltration mission, which has lasted 6 weeks. The latest intel shows he was spotted near the LA County Museum of Art, but he hasn't contacted me. I need someone to find him." Jack refilled his teacup, thinking for a moment, then asked, "Since you're seeking my help, is it because of internal issues, or do you suspect he's turned?" Ray King's smile widened, his face resembling a blooming chrysanthemum. "I like smart young people like you. Have you considered joining the IRS?" Jack spread his hands. "Sorry, you're a step too late. Someone already invited me before you did. Besides, I know nothing about financial and tax laws and absolutely hate going undercover." Chapter 78: The Generous IRS. Strictly speaking, Jack isn't completely clueless. The sacred texts on traversing worlds even include some knowledge of accounting, though it's limited to basic bookkeeping. However, the vast sea of financial regulations in the USA deterred him from further study. There are better things to do with one's time than competing with Chris for a job. Let's discuss the specifics. I'm not great at finding people, but the place you mentioned happens to be my turf, so I can think of a way. Jack didn't lay all his cards on the table. Only a fool would show everything up front, and this old fox hadn't named his price yet. Ray King remained expressionless, but he had already placed this overly handsome young man on the same level as himself. Alejandro Macia, alias Sasilo Hayda, an excellent forensic accountant and a cryptocurrency expert. 6 weeks ago, he was embedded in an arms smuggling ring. The goal was to infiltrate their financial system and disrupt their funding channels. However, he has not been heard from since. I assumed he was either discovered and silenced or had already. Jack nodded in understanding. It was 2019, and although cryptocurrencies hadn't yet peaked, their trading volumes were increasing yearly. If Alejandro Macia had indeed gained control of the smuggling ring's digital currency, he could easily abscond with millions. Such temptation is hard for an ordinary person to resist. How much do you trust this subordinate of yours? What should I do if I find him? Ray King pondered for a moment. Emotionally, I trust him completely. He's one of my most loyal men. Since he's in LA and not overseas, it's a signal. I tend to believe he hasn't betrayed us, but you can't guarantee that your internal operations are foolproof, right? Jack finished his sentence. Ray King nodded. That's my mistake. This undercover operation was a last-minute decision. I didn't establish a secure communication channel with him. The team responsible for him has been detained. Now, the only thing to do is find him quickly and bring him directly to me. No problem. But I need you to contact my superior, Chief Anderson. Only with her authorization can I reasonably mobilize resources to find Alejandro Macia and ensure his safety, then notify you to pick him up. You can make up any reason. She won't question it, Jack added. Ray King looked surprised, seemingly unsure of Jack's confidence. After checking his phone, he nodded. Thank you very much. If this operation succeeds, we expect to intercept 60% of the smuggling ring's cash flow, totaling about $30 million. The IRS will give you 1% of that as a reward. Jack's facade of calm nearly cracked at the mention of that number. After a moment of silence, he chuckled bitterly. Are you this generous with your own people? Ray King smiled. Our internal policy is to turn in 90% of the proceeds from each operation. The remaining 10% is divided among the participants based on their contributions. Your 1% will come from my share. Jack sighed. Now I understand why you're so confident in your subordinate's loyalty. The IRS is indeed wealthy. If it weren't for the risk of letting Maureen down, he'd want to latch onto this golden opportunity. No, he definitely needs to get some compensation from Maureen later. After the discussion, Ray King handed Jack a file on Alejandro Macia and a brief introduction to the arms smuggling ring. Once Jack memorized the details, Ray took the file back and said he would fly back to DC that night. The two shook hands at the door to part ways. I'll contact Chief Anderson first thing in the morning. She is quite a rare beauty. Even an old man like me is somewhat smitten. Ray King winked slyly at Jack before leaving. Damn old fox, Jack cursed internally. This was not unnecessary flattery, after all. Letting the other party think they have some small leverage over you makes you more trustworthy than being completely inscrutable. This was a lesson learned from over 40 years of life experience in his previous life. Oh, right. After a few steps, Ray King suddenly turned back and said, I have 1 year left until retirement. Until then, my invitation to you stands. It's been a long time since I've met a young man as outstanding as you. Jack returned a fake smile. Even if I don't choose the IRS, I'm sure we'll be good friends. Next time you're in LA, let me know what food you like. Watching the old fox leave in a black Mercedes, Jack tidied up the place and drove to Zoe's house. After their usual time together, Jack recounted the events to Zoe, though he withheld some details about the accountant's true identity, merely hinting at a gray background. Zoe, aware of Jack's mysterious methods after multiple personal experiences, was nonetheless surprised that he had connected with a senior official in such a powerful department like the IRS so quickly. Especially when she heard about the nearly $300,000 reward, she was stunned. Cough, cough. Annoyed by Jack's lack of decency, Zoe playfully punched him before going to the bathroom to rinse her mouth. How do you plan to find that IRS undercover agent? Snuggling into Jack's arms, Zoe lazily shifted to find the most comfortable position. Ah, isn't that why I came to you? Jack grinned, trying to appease her. His rough actions earlier had satisfied a man's desire for conquest, but he still needed to soothe his woman afterward. Let me think. How about Smitty? Huh. Jack was the one surprised this time. Are you serious? Smitty was the most invisible figure in the Wilshire precinct. Even the perpetually stern-faced Inspector Gray couldn't do anything about him. This nearly 60-year-old man had moved into an RV in the precinct parking lot after countless marriages and divorces, just waiting to retire with a full pension. The IRS privately commissioned you. I can't mobilize the precinct's police force to help you find someone without raising questions. Smitty's beat includes the County Museum of Art. He's been patrolling there since he became a cop 19 years ago. You might try bribing him a little. Chapter 79, Pregnancy. Is that old guy reliable? Jack still had some doubts. He might not be able to help you catch someone, but finding a person shouldn't be a problem. Don't underestimate a nearly 20-year veteran patrol officer who hasn't fired a shot. Even the local riffraff give him some respect. With a mix of apprehension and hope, Jack held Zoe and fell into a deep sleep. The next day, after the briefing, Inspector Gray called Jack into his office alone and handed him a photo of Alejandro Macia, who was using the alias Cecil Ojeda. Find this person. He was last seen near the County Museum of Art. Keep it low-key. Jack feigned ignorance. Can I seek help from other officers? Inspector Gray nodded. You can, but it must remain confidential. After capturing him, do not interrogate him or log any records. Contact the IRS immediately using the number provided, and ensure his safety until they come to pick him up. Jack put on a puzzled expression, left Gray's office, and made a copy of the photo. Then, he took a box of donuts and found the old loafer Smitty, who gave him a knowing look. Spill it, kid. Do you want the contact info for that new redhead at Dispatch, or are you looking for tickets to a strip club? Jack was momentarily at a loss for words. I just need your help finding someone on the streets. Half of it, Smitty said with a smug expression. What? Jack was taken aback. Could Smitty be one of those hidden masters pretending to be ordinary? He remembered that Smitty did organize a secret society, but wasn't that just a joke by the scriptwriters? How did he know about the IRS contact from last night? And how did he dare to ask for such a big cut? You're doing a side job, right? Working with a bounty hunter. Catching a bail jumper. I don't care about the bounty amount. Either I get half, or at least $500. Well, he was still being greedy, but not in the way Jack initially feared. Jack breathed a sigh of relief, his face showing indignation. That's impossible. I'm just helping a poor woman find her runaway husband. $50, no more. Smitty's beady eyes turned a few times, reluctant. $200, no less. $100 and a homemade apple pie. If you don't want it, I'll find someone else. Deal. Give me the photo. Jack's hand felt lighter as the box of donuts and the photo vanished. The day of Angela's official transfer to the detective bureau was approaching, but today, while patrolling, she wore a constant look of distress. Under normal circumstances, Jack would have eagerly offered his concern, hoping to gossip. But today, he was preoccupied. The bounty from this task was substantial for him, and Smitty didn't seem entirely reliable. Pondering whether to recruit additional help or try his luck at the museum after work, Jack felt a nudge on his arm and turned to see Angela looking at him with a pained expression. Jack was startled. This wasn't like her. Usually, Angela was more manly than most male cops, and now she looked like a wronged wife. What was going on? Quickly reflecting on whether he'd offended her today, Jack cautiously asked, Wesley. He doesn't want to take me to meet his mother. Angela burst into tears, scaring Jack out of his wits. He hastily pulled the patrol car over and handed her a tissue. I'm a bit of a tomboy, I eat like a slob, and my room is a mess, but I've been trying to change. Bang. Jack banged his head on the steering wheel, looking like he was in agony. He had to do it. He feared he'd burst out laughing and be pummeled by an enraged Angela. In the 3 years he'd been in this world, apart from the 3 girls entangled with him, women like Lucy, Angela, and even Neela Harper and Bishop from the DEA, though flawed, were all strong and independent. They craved love and marriage but wouldn't lose themselves over money. This starkly contrasted with the high-maintenance princesses Jack had encountered in his previous life. He'd never been across the ocean, so he didn't know if American women were all like this. Rationally, it might be that these strong characters were just rare portrayals in American TV shows. Given the actual social standing of women in both countries, this seemed likely. Jack was grateful that the women around him now, whether involved with him or not, were not overly demanding. Angela's behavior suggested only one thing. Starting the car again, Jack turned towards the central hospital, with Angela looking puzzled. "Where are we going?" Jack stifled a laugh, feeling like he was turning into a friend to all women. "To the hospital, for a checkup." "Don't joke with me. My mood is already bad enough." "I'm not joking. I know many women who blame themselves, but you, Angela, are not one of them. Normally, you'd be complaining about Wesley being a jerk or confronting him and then making up. You wouldn't be moping like this." Seeing her still glaring at him, Jack had to give her a hint. "When was the last time your friend visited you?" "Oh my God." Angela frantically checked her calendar on her phone. "I thought it was just late this time. You know, I'm never on time." "Are you saying I might be pregnant?" Jack quickly denied it. "I didn't say that. I don't know. I have no idea about your condition. You should ask Wesley. Sometimes, protection fails. I just made a simple deduction." Angela suddenly looked shy and a bit awkward. "Actually, you just need to stop at a pharmacy and get a pregnancy test. No need for all this trouble." Chapter 80 Tale. And then what? Keep worrying if the second line shows up clearly or if there's an error. Jack, the friend to all women, wouldn't let this silly girl hesitate any longer. He directly dragged her to the central hospital and found Yaris. Half an hour later, Yaris stood before them with a lab report, smiling. "Though I'm not an obstetrician, based on your hormone levels, I can confirm that you are indeed pregnant, Angela. Congratulations to you both." "Ah." Angela screamed with joy, hugging Jack tightly and almost kissing him. "Hehehe." Jack awkwardly pried her arms off. "Congratulations, my foot." Yaris was joking, and now you, the person involved, were joining in the fun too. Jack called the real culprit, Wesley, to come to the hospital. While he waited, his phone rang. The call was from Smitty. "Hey kid, I found your guy at a motel. But are you sure this Sassel guy is just a scumbag? Did he sleep with some gang leader's woman or something? There are professionals looking for him. You'd better hurry, or you might only find his body." Jack was surprised by how reliable Smitty turned out to be, finding the guy in less than a day. He quickly jotted down the address, bid farewell to Yaris and the lovey-dovey couple, and drove to the motel. After checking his gun and spare magazine, Jack walked into the front office of the Santa Monica Motel. "Someone said they saw this person here. Can you tell me his room number?" Jack showed a photo to the disheveled, overweight middle-aged manager. "Wow, Officer Taver, that's not how it works. Either you have a warrant, or..." The motel manager's jowls wobbled as he grinned and held out 3 fingers, making a counting motion. Jack wasn't in the mood to waste time with this jerk, especially since he only had 5 20s on him, which he still needed to give to Smitty. He tapped his gun holster. "If you don't want cops here every week, you'd better tell me. Smitty is waiting for my apple pie. If I'm late and he has to watch tonight's game with cold pizza." The manager shrugged and pointed to a ground-floor room in the parking lot. "Room 1108, right over there. 2 guys were asking about him 10 minutes ago. They were much nicer and even gave me $20. Damn." Jack felt the situation slipping away and hurried outside. Before he could reach the parking lot, someone was thrown out of the window of the room, followed by sounds of a struggle. The door burst open, and a Middle Eastern man with black curly hair ran out. It was the IRS undercover agent in the photo. "Hey, LAPD, stop." The warning was useless. The IRS agent bolted. The man thrown out the window, a skinny Latino covered in tattoos, staggered up, his face bloody from the glass shards. Seeing the tattoos and the teardrop ink, indicating at least 1 kill, Jack's hand moved to his Glock. Another large, tattooed black man charged out of the room, chasing the agent. "Hey, drop your weapon." The Latino thug's eyes glinted with malice as he reached for his waistband. Jack shot him down and turned to the motel manager, who was trying to squeeze his bulk behind the counter. "Call 911. Now." Jack kicked the struggling thug unconscious, handcuffed him to let him bleed out, picked up the thug's gun, ejected the magazine, and tucked it into his waistband before giving chase. Taking down one gang thug had cost him a bit of time, but he wasn't too worried. The two men ahead had barely covered 150 meters. If it was a short sprint, Jack couldn't guarantee catching them immediately. But over 800 meters to a kilometer, with his current physique, even Liu Xiang and Usain Bolt would have a hard time outpacing him. 7A26, Santa Monica, Motel, shots fired. Requesting backup. Suspect injured. Call for an ambulance. Jack called into his radio as he sprinted, keeping his focus on the large black man chasing the agent. Any sign of the man drawing a weapon, and Jack would shoot to kill. That IRS agent was a whopping $300,000 to Jack. Anyone threatening him was threatening Jack's reward. The IRS agent ran onto a pedestrian bridge, realizing he couldn't outrun his pursuer. He stopped a quarter of the way across, climbed over the railing, and seemed ready to jump. Jack's heart nearly stopped. He kicked the large black man unconscious, holstered his Glock, pulled out a zip tie to bind the man's hands behind his back, and hurried to stop the agent. Hey! Alejandro Macia, right? The agent paused, hearing his real name, and looked at the uniformed Jack. King sent me. Ray King, your boss. He said he trusts you and sent me to find you and ensure your safety. Jack stepped on the gang thug's back, reaching out to stop the agent from doing anything rash. I don't know you. Alejandro Macia looked suspicious but stopped moving. He gave me a number to call him once I found you. Want to call him yourself? Jack pulled out his phone, pretending to hand it over. Just as Macia reached for it, the rusty railing creaked. Oh no, don't do this. Jack lunged but missed Macia's hand. Just like a scene from countless movies, their fingers brushed past each other, and Jack watched helplessly as Macia fell from the bridge. My iPhone 6. No, my $300,000. Jack leaned over the edge, watching Macia crash onto a car roof, coughing up blood. Everyone move back. Jack waved the crowd away and jumped down after a running start. You jumped from up there. Are you crazy? John, arriving for backup, pointed at the 5-meter-high bridge, shouting. Jack, holding the shattered remains of his phone, nodded tearfully. Chapter 81, Finding a Car. Regardless of the situation, Jack knew he had to personally dispose of his phone's remains. Who knows? If someone managed to recover the data inside, he might end up in the same scandalous situation as Edison Chen. It's just a little over 16 feet, 5 meters. Look, I'm not even hurt. Jack nonchalantly brushed the dust off his uniform. To avoid appearing too extraordinary, he had intentionally performed a rolling landing after jumping. Otherwise, given his current physical condition, he could have done a Marvel-style superhero landing, you know, the one-knee pose. If he had, the onlookers' cheers might have been even louder. There's another one at the motel. You take care of it. The higher-ups said to keep an eye on this idiot. Bring me something to eat when you come back to the hospital. Jack climbed into the ambulance, tossing the broken gun he had tucked at his waist to John as evidence, and waved him off before shutting the door forcefully. What's the patient's condition? In the emergency room of the central hospital, Carrie, who was there to receive the patient, was taken aback upon seeing Jack again. Comminuted fracture of the left femur, possible internal bleeding, and a concussion. The paramedic reported crisply. Blood pressure. Carrie checked the injuries as she spoke. Stable. We administered 2 1,000 cubic centimeters bags of saline en route to the hospital. Carrie finally looked up to greet Jack, a peculiar expression on her face. How did he get hurt? Car accident, or did you beat him up? No. He was being chased and fell from a pedestrian bridge onto a car. I jumped down to save him. Jack quickly explained. You jumped off a bridge? Are you the Terminator? Do you know his name? Carrie teased him despite her busy schedule. Alex, Cesar Ojeda. That's what it says on his driver's license. Jack looked a bit embarrassed, almost letting something slip. All right, get him an MRI and notify the surgical team. Do you need to be checked too? Jack shook his head repeatedly. Though he knew the guy wasn't in any immediate danger, he couldn't help but ask. Could the concussion cause him to lose his memory? Secretly, Jack prayed for no dramatic twists like that. Losing the $30,000 reward he was eyeing would be a real blow. Carrie seemed a bit puzzled by his question. He's involved in a significant case. I'm a bit concerned. Carrie shook her head. It depends on the results. Usually, without intracranial bleeding, memory loss isn't likely. Breathing a sigh of relief, Jack urgently grabbed Carrie's arm. This guy is really important. He's being hunted. I can't go into the operating room, so can you keep an eye on him? You're the one I trust the most in this hospital. Carrie, seeing the anxious look on his face, patted his arm reassuringly. Leave it to me. The doctors here are all trustworthy, but I'll accompany him during the surgery and notify you immediately if there's any issue. Jack finally relaxed and stepped aside, watching as Carrie and the nurses pushed the stretcher into the operating room. Hey, Jack, you're back. Returning to the hospital lobby, Jack ran into Angela and Wesley, who were just about to leave. I was supposed to find someone today. As soon as I got there, things went south. Luckily, it wasn't too bad. Carrie has already taken him in for surgery. Jack looked frustrated. Then I'll stay and help you. Angela turned, pulled Wesley by the tie, and kissed him on the lips. Darling, forgive me for not being able to join you for your mother's dinner. Hey, no. Jack was caught off guard by the PDA. Sure, he was a bit hungry, but not that hungry for this kind of attention. You two go ahead with your plans. Both suspects are down, so it should be fine. Jack didn't dare keep Angela around. After all, she was pregnant. If anything happened, he couldn't take responsibility. Are you sure? Just go. John will be here soon. You know he won't miss any chance to see Carrie. Finally getting rid of the lovebirds, Jack put on a professional smile and chatted with the pretty nurse at the front desk. He managed to borrow the desk phone. Ray King, yes, we found him. There was a little incident, but he should be fine. He's in surgery. I'll wait for you at the hospital. After hanging up, Jack bought a few Snickers from the vending machine to stave off his hunger and waited by the operating room. Ray King, on the other end of the line, was surprised at how smoothly things had gone. Finding the missing undercover agent in less than 24 hours made his all-night flight back to Washington, D.C., seem a bit unnecessary. Still, he promised to bring people and head out immediately, aiming to arrive by the next morning at the latest. With a long night ahead, Jack eagerly anticipated John's arrival. Even a burger and a Coke would be better than the overly sweet Snickers bars. Hey, look what I brought you. John appeared at the operating room door, holding a large paper bag with a big In-N-Out logo on it. Jack was overjoyed. He tossed the half-eaten Snickers into the trash and reached for the bag, but John slapped his hand away. Careful, there's also a portion for Carrie. She loves their cheese fries and lemon iced tea. Priorities over friends, huh? Jack muttered under his breath, taking the double burger and iced Coke John carefully handed over. He bit into the burger, letting out a satisfied sigh. How much longer is the surgery? John also grabbed a burger and began eating, his eyes never leaving the indicator light on the operating room door, eager to see his old flame. Love rekindled after so many years, Jack thought to himself, this guy is a goner. No idea. It's been less than an hour. Is your heart rate jumping from 0 to 180 again? Having just been fed some PDA by Angela and Wesley, Jack was now prying into John's love life. With Zoe and Maureen not often around and Hannah out of town, the single life felt a bit too lonely and cold. I'm going to propose to her as soon as I finish renovating the house. John grinned like a lovesick teenager. Jack suddenly found his burger hard to swallow. Was he asking for trouble? Maybe he should rethink helping John with the renovation and drag it out for a year or so. You guys just reconnected a few months ago. You're sure Carrie is your soulmate for the rest of your life? John glanced at Jack with a look that said, you young folks don't understand love. 20 years ago, I left without a word. Now fate has brought us back together. What's there to hesitate about? In the meantime, help me find a good used car. I'll help you finish the house as quickly as possible. Deal. What kind of car are you looking for? John, an experienced driver and a pickup enthusiast, had plenty of leads on used vehicles. Jack thought back to his last car incident and was tempted to say he wanted something spacious. John's old Toyota pickup had been replaced with a Toyota Tundra after it got wrecked, and Jack had been eyeing it ever since. He wondered if he should consider getting a Ford Raptor when he had the money. Chapter 82, Deceived. Despite his fascination with John's new Toyota Tundra, Jack couldn't help but envy Hannah's Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500. Every time she drove that muscle car with the red Cobra badge through town, it turned heads like no other. How about finding me a classic muscle car? Jack suggested. Men shouldn't come into money too easily, it makes them restless. Jack hadn't even gotten his hands on the reward yet and he was already dreaming of buying a car. While he had accumulated quite a few practical skills over the years, working on a car himself might be a bit of a stretch. But acquiring and restoring a classic muscle car seemed like a feasible project. Living in the USA, where gas is cheap and the roads are long, he felt compelled to own a high-horsepower, iconic car. It just seemed right. John nodded, understanding Jack's desire. Give me 2 weeks. I'll find you something that'll make you happy. An hour or so later, the operating room doors finally swung open. Both men rushed forward. The patient doesn't show any signs of internal bleeding at the moment, but we need to keep monitoring him. The surgery on his leg is complete, and he should wake up in about half an hour. However, considering his mild concussion, I wouldn't recommend questioning him for long periods, Carrie informed them, noticing John beside her. Though her face was half covered by a mask, the crinkles around her eyes betrayed her smile. I just need to watch over him, not question him. You guys carry on. Seeing the unspoken connection between John and Carrie, Jack gave up on further explanations and helped the nurses wheel the still unconscious Alejandro Macia to his room. Caring for a patient is a tiresome job. Jack couldn't afford to be careless. With his belly now full, he felt a bit drowsy and resorted to pacing back and forth in the room to stay awake. After what felt like an eternity, Alejandro Macia groaned softly and began to stir. Where am I? You're in a hospital, Mr. Macia. Jack quickly approached the bed and gently held him down, signaling him not to move. You just had surgery on your left leg. The doctor said you might have a mild concussion. Macia looked dazed. Who are you? How do you know my real name? Jack's heart skipped a beat. The thing he feared most seemed to be happening. Had Macia really lost his memory? I rescued you from 2 hitmen. Remember? You fell from the pedestrian bridge, and I brought you to the hospital. Macia rubbed his forehead and groaned again. Sorry, my head is still a bit fuzzy. You mentioned earlier that you were sent by Mr. King. Jack exhaled in relief. No memory loss, thank God. Ray King asked me to find you and provide protection. He's probably on a flight to LA right now. We need to leave the hospital immediately. They won't give up easily. Someone betrayed me. Macia suddenly became agitated and tried to get up. Jack firmly held him down. Whether this guy was betrayed or planning to run away with stolen money didn't matter. His job was to keep an eye on him until Ray King arrived in the morning. Calm down. Your injuries prevent you from moving. Ray King said he has your team under control. I'm here to protect you, and the LAPD is ready to provide support. You're safe here. Macia's anxiety slowly subsided, but he kept mumbling to himself. Please be careful. They've hired professional killers. I've been on the run from them. Be careful, B. Probably due to the sedative in the Ford drip, Macia drifted back into a deep sleep as his tension eased. Jack instinctively reached for his phone to check the time, only to remember that his beloved iPhone 6 was smashed to pieces. Just then, John quietly peeked through the door, glanced at the sleeping patient, and gestured for Jack to join him. What time is it? Jack asked, not in the habit of wearing a watch and missing his phone's convenience. Just past 10. Carrie's shift ends at midnight. I thought I'd come check on you before taking her home, John replied, a hint of awkwardness in his tone. Did she kick you out because you were in the way? Jack teased with a grin. Despite the jokes, having John around made the wait less tedious. The two chatted in the hallway, discussing everything from John's house renovations to Jack's ideal muscle car. Before they knew it, it was midnight, and John hastily bid Jack farewell, eager to spend the night with Carrie. Is he really that eager at his age? Jack thought to himself, feeling a bit smug about how well he'd controlled his emotions today, despite the stressful events. Just then, a young, frail-looking Latina nurse approached him. "Hi, I'm here to transfer the patient to the ICU for a checkup to rule out internal bleeding." Jack eyed her suspiciously and glanced at her name badge, gesturing for her to hand it over. "No problem," the nurse said, handing over her ID card. "Susan Taylor. How long have you worked here?" Jack asked, still cautious, despite the photo on the ID matching her face. "Many fives," she replied, spreading her hands in a vague gesture. Seeing Jack's confusion, she elaborated with a smile. 5 months in the ICU, 5 years in the hospital, and I started at 5 p.m. today." Jack relaxed a bit but insisted, "Okay, but I need to go with you." "No problem." The nurse expertly raised the bed rail and pushed the bed out of the room. Jack watched as the nurse wheeled Messia into the ICU room and closed the door. He continued to wait aimlessly outside until he saw John and Carrie, now out of her lab coat, chatting and laughing as they approached. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Carrie asked, surprised to see Jack. The nurse said she needed to do some post-op checks and moved the patient to the ICU. "But I just spoke with his surgeon. He said he'd personally handle the post-op checks," Carrie replied, puzzled. Damn it. Jack finally realized something was wrong. The nurse hadn't slipped him a note or even flirted a bit, things he had assumed were because she might have different preferences. He quickly pushed open the ICU room door, only to find it empty, the door on the other side leading to another corridor left ajar. "Where's the nearest elevator?" Jack turned to Carrie, knowing they had to move Messia in a wheelchair and could only use the hospital elevator. "I know the way. Follow me," John quickly pointed out the direction, and they sprinted down the corridor, rounding the corner just in time to see the elevator doors closing. Inside, the Latina nurse and a bald, suited man stood next to the unconscious Messia, who was slumped over in a wheelchair. Chapter 83, Making Money is Never Easy. Jack's heart sank as he watched Messia fall into the hands of the enemy. What alarmed him even more was the bald man in the elevator sporting a red tie. A bald head, a black suit, and a red tie, it was hard not to draw ominous conclusions from such a combination, even if the face wasn't familiar. He wasn't particularly handsome, in fact, he was rather unattractive. But the overall get-up screamed trouble. "John, keep an eye on which floor the elevator stops at." "I'll take the stairs." "Radio me with the floor number," Jack shouted back to John as he dashed towards the stairwell, leaving John by the elevator. If the people in the elevator were indeed the type of hitman Jack feared, the situation could turn ugly quickly. Whether it was a bizarre crossover where a game world had blended into reality or just a live-action adaptation of some game, John, an ordinary cop, wouldn't stand a chance against these near-superhuman adversaries. Only Jack, armed with his system-enhanced abilities, stood a chance against such formidable foes. He raced down the stairs, pondering this, when John's voice crackled over the radio, though slightly unclear. "Jack, the elevator stopped at the basement level." "Is that the parking garage?" Jack paused, worried about losing signal if he continued too far. Let me check." "No, it's the morgue." "Jack, be careful. I'm heading down now. Call for backup. You'd better bring plenty of reinforcements." Jack's voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. His steps became slightly more frantic. Although a staunch atheist and not afraid of ghosts, horror movies had always been his Achilles heel. The thought of wandering into a creepy morgue wasn't comforting. Ironically, while people said watching horror films could make girls jump into your arms, Jack felt he might be the one jumping into someone else's. As Jack pushed through the heavy iron door, a chilling coolness enveloped him. Glock in hand, he crept forward under the dim flicker of aged fluorescent lights. Why do morgues insist on using such dim, old-fashioned fluorescent lights? And why must at least 1 or 2 tubes always flicker incessantly? The eerie atmosphere was off the charts. Jack moved forward cautiously, heart pounding. Never had he hated his heightened senses from the system as much as he did now. The buzzing flicker of the lights, the faint hum of an old exhaust fan spinning feebly, and the faint odor of formaldehyde mixed with the subtle stench of decay, it was all overwhelming. His adrenaline was surging. He wondered if he should visit Zoe tonight. But no, their date wasn't due yet. Those assassins were too professional. The way they handled the ICU transfer and the smooth conversation with the nurse were far beyond the clumsy goons he had encountered earlier at the motel. Jack prided himself on his caution, but he had still been duped. It was time to reflect. Recent success had perhaps made him a bit complacent. With a sharp crunch, Jack's foot hit some broken glass as he was about to turn a corner. Glancing up, he saw a half-shattered fluorescent tube above. His instincts flared, and he dropped to a crouch just in time. A silent, lethal kick came flying from the darkness, aimed right at his midsection. Then came a flurry of knees and elbows, targeting his abdomen, belly, and chest, culminating in a final strike toward his vulnerable throat. Wham! The female nurse's elbow stopped just short of Jack's throat, her slender forearm gripped tightly by Jack's large hand. My turn now. Jack snarled, the initial fear replaced by a grim determination. Holding his Glock in his left hand, he had anticipated the final, deadly blow, having preemptively ducked. His training with the accountant had taught him well. He was no longer the feeble, barely fit individual he once was. His muscles had grown strong, providing a formidable defense against such attacks. The nurse, or rather, the female assassin, had delivered several fierce blows to his chest and abdomen, but they barely fazed him. Instead of dodging, Jack had endured them, predicting her final strike and countering it. The hits had hurt, but not enough to slow him down or make him drop his Glock. With a swift, silent knee strike aimed at her groin, Jack incapacitated her. She crumpled to the ground without a sound. It turned out that not only men were vulnerable to a well-aimed strike to the crotch, women were, too. After securing the handcuffs on the now unconscious female assassin, Jack felt his earlier fear melt away. His priority was now rescuing Messia. No demon or ghost could stand between him and his reward. He was already imagining the size of the fridge he'd buy for his kitchen with the bonus money. Jack pressed on, gun drawn, senses sharp. He carefully hugged the walls as he advanced, finally catching some movement in the coroner's office ahead. Peeking inside, Jack's heart finally steadied. In the dimly lit room, amidst the stainless steel autopsy tables, the bald man stood with his back to Jack, a circular bone saw in hand, clearly threatening Messia. Jack's tension dissipated as he noted the lack of a barcode on the back of the bald man's head. This wasn't the formidable hitman he feared. Tell me the password, or I'll start with your ear, then your fingers. Drop that tool, or I won't hesitate to blow your shiny head off. Jack announced, stepping through the coroner's office door into the adjoining autopsy room. The bald man scoffed and pressed the buzzing bone saw closer to Messia's carotid artery. Drop your gun, or you'll only get a corpse. Jack almost laughed out loud. Here's a fun fact, a circular saw designed for cutting plaster and bone moves in a back-and-forth motion. It could handle hard materials but was pretty ineffective against soft skin. Even if the guy pressed it down, it would leave no more than a red mark on Messia's neck. Opting not to educate the assassin on these details, Jack calmly ejected the magazine from his Glock and placed it on a nearby stainless steel autopsy table. Adopting a boxing stance, he provocatively beckoned the bald man with his free hand. The bald man grinned maliciously, set down the buzzing saw, and slowly stripped off his black suit jacket. He loosened his red tie, cracked his neck, and flexed, emitting a series of popping sounds. Though roughly the same height as Jack, the man's frame was much more imposing. The shirt beneath his suit was so tightly stretched by his muscles that the buttons seemed ready to burst off. Did your mom feed you protein shakes instead of milk as a baby? Jack taunted, feigning nervousness as he backed up a couple of steps. His real aim was to lure the guy away from the unconscious Messia. The bald man's grin widened as he approached, ready for a fight. Chapter 84, David Rossi, Criminal Minds Crossover. Messia felt like the anesthetic was still clouding his senses, making him see hallucinations. As an IRS investigator trained rigorously in shooting and combat, he was witnessing a fight that defied his understanding, one that pitted mismatched opponents against each other. The bald man was grotesque and menacing, with a burly, muscular frame. Opposite him stood a handsome, almost bookish-looking young officer from the LAPD. Though similar in height, the officer was noticeably smaller in build. Despite the large room, the presence of 5 stainless steel autopsy tables made the space surprisingly cramped. If Mishia had been in the officer's shoes, he would have never engaged in hand-to-hand combat in such conditions, especially since it stripped the smaller opponent of his only advantage, agility. Yet, the LAPD officer had no intention of dodging. The bald man, despite his bulk, launched a swift and brutal jab at the officer, who astonishingly responded with an identical move. Their fists collided midair, and Mishia clearly heard the sharp crack of a bone breaking. To his astonishment, it was the bald man who cried out in pain. The bald man's right hand hung limp, fingers unable to close, resembling a claw. As Mishia wondered if the LAPD officer was wearing brass knuckles, the bald man gritted his teeth and swung his left fist in a wide arc aimed at the officer's right ear. Such a blow would typically cause a severe concussion, incapacitating the target instantly. Yet, the officer, undeterred, mirrored the attack with his left fist, striking the bald man's forearm with precision. Another crisp snap echoed as the bald man's forearm deformed, and his redirected punch grazed the officer's cheek harmlessly. With both arms now broken, the bald man doubled over in agony. The officer, identified as Jack, smiled slightly, despite the blood trickling from his mouth. "My turn now," he said. What followed was a rapid succession of indistinguishable blows. Jack mimicked the combination moves of the female assassin he had encountered earlier. The bald man couldn't block a single hit. His abdomen, midsection, and chest took the brunt of Jack's relentless assault. Finally, with a sickening crunch, the bald man's jaw shattered, and he collapsed to the ground like a rag doll. Jack, feeling some relief from his frustration, knelt down and bound the bald man's limbs with plastic zip ties before turning to help Mishia up. "Can you move?" Mishia managed a weak smile. "Not at all. Are all LAPD officers like you, some kind of monster?" As Jack approached, Mishia confirmed that there were no brass knuckles. This baby-faced young man had single-handedly defeated his opponent with just his fists. At that moment, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the hallway, accompanied by John's calls. "Jack. All clear. Suspect is subdued." Jack raised his voice to indicate his position. A group of LAPD officers stormed into the autopsy room. John, leading the way, holstered his weapon and stared wide-eyed at the bald man still moaning on the floor. With his jaw broken, the man could only grunt painfully, drooling all over the floor. "Are you okay?" Jack wiped his mouth and flashed a charming smile. "I think I need Garrus to introduce me to a gentler nurse." Scene break. "Thank you very much, Officer Jack Taverler. On behalf of the IRS, I appreciate all you've done." Ray King, a thin, elderly man, stepped out of the hospital room with a piece of paper in hand, and eagerly shook hands with Jack, who was waiting outside. "The pleasure was mine, Director King." For the sake of the substantial bonus, Jack didn't mind exchanging a few pleasantries. As Jack glanced at the paper in King's hand, he couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Did everything go smoothly?" Ray King nodded with a smile. "Very smoothly. Alejandro Mishia proved to be a loyal and reliable agent. He intercepted nearly 50 million in illegal funds. This cryptocurrency now belongs to the IRS," the old man added quietly. "That much?" Jack's eyes lit up. This old man was quite transparent, definitely someone worth keeping in touch with. "You know, the price of digital currency has been climbing recently." Ray King winked, making his wrinkled face look somewhat comical, though it was clear he was in a very good mood. "The IRS will note the source of your bonus. Also, my previous invitation still stands. Mishia was very impressed with your skills." Jack offered an apologetic smile. While the IRS was indeed a prestigious part of the law enforcement system, the thought of armed tax enforcement didn't appeal to him. In contrast, the FBI's BAU unit and the cases they handled intrigued him more, given the system's rewarding experience points. Of course, maintaining a good relationship with the financial overseers was essential. Just as Jack was about to explain further, a stranger's voice interrupted from behind them. "Old man, this kid is already reserved by me. You should drop the idea." Jack turned to see a scholarly-looking white man in his early 50s, walking briskly towards them with Maureen. "David Rossi." Ray King stepped forward and embraced the man warmly. "David, I didn't expect to see you here. Aren't you busy writing and giving lectures across the country?" The middle-aged man named David Rossi had a neatly trimmed beard, graying at the temples, and his hair slicked back with hair oil in a vintage style. The BAU ran into some trouble recently, so they called me back. David Rossi smiled as he turned to Jack. Officer Jack Taverler? Yes, sir. Jack met Rossi's deep, perceptive gaze, feeling a momentary unease. He couldn't quite describe the look in Rossi's eyes, deep, wise, melancholic, seemingly capable of seeing through to one's innermost secrets. Jack hadn't felt this way since he first met Maureen. Unlike Maureen's comforting demeanor as a psychologist, Rossi's aura was more intense. Of course, Jack was no longer the nervous rookie he once was. Now equipped with advanced psychology skills, he respectfully extended his hand. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Rossi. He didn't forget to greet Maureen as well. Long time no see, Professor Cahill. David Rossi didn't immediately let go of Jack's hand. He looked Jack over carefully and inspected his knuckles before expressing his amazement. How did you manage to break that suspect so thoroughly? I just saw him, he has at least 7 or 8 broken bones. Chapter 85, Kit. Jack offered a shy smile, pointing to the cut on his mouth to indicate that he wasn't entirely unscathed. Maybe that guy's bones were just brittle. It was a tight situation, I had to give it my all. In truth, even though Jack's combat skills had reached a master level, the quick takedown of the 2 assassins today wasn't due to any particular technique but rather his superhuman physical abilities. The female assassin's thin limbs couldn't penetrate his defenses, and while the bald man's muscles looked intimidating, they were mostly for show, no better than those gym heroes. Had it been one of those barcode killers, Jack wouldn't have dared to engage in hand-to-hand combat. He would have needed to cast a healing spell on himself before even thinking of firing a shot. Ray King and David Rossi seemed to have a history together, their conversation held in hushed tones. After a while, the thin old man left a few IRS agents to guard Misha and hurried off. David Rossi wasn't here specifically for Jack, it seemed he had business in LA and decided to drop by. However, it was clear that he was pleased with Maureen's recommendation. Knowing that Jack had been up all night, Rossi showed genuine concern, advising him to get some rest and assuming an authoritative demeanor. We'll meet again soon. I hope our first collaboration goes smoothly. With that cryptic remark, David Rossi bid farewell and left the hospital. Scene break. Jack's administrative leave hadn't even ended when John eagerly dragged him out of his house and shoved him into his newly purchased Toyota Tundra. As they passed the San Fernando Valley sign, Jack started to get nervous. What kind of side gig had this old-timer picked up recently? Where exactly are we going? If John didn't explain soon, Jack was ready to jump out of the car. He had standards, selling his skills, not his dignity. This place was too risky, acting in movies, no matter how lucrative, was off the table. I found the car you wanted. John's voice brimmed with barely concealed excitement. An 80s classic muscle car, supposedly in excellent condition, and the owner is asking only $5,000. The 80s. Only $5,000. Jack wondered if he had misheard or if John had lost his mind. His old beat-up car had cost him $3,000. An 80s muscle car, unlike those vintage cars with investment potential, shouldn't be priced so high. You'll be pleasantly surprised, I promise. John was confident, but Jack remained skeptical. The 40-minute drive wasn't long, and soon John pulled into a farm, parking in front of a dilapidated barn under the guidance of an elderly man who seemed to be at least 80 years old. Mr. Robbins, my friend would like to see your treasure. Seeing John act as if he was on a pilgrimage, Jack might have thought they were in on a scam together if he didn't know John better. The old man shuffled to the barn door and struggled to open it. Jack and John quickly stepped in to help. Is this a Pontiac Firebird? Jack was speechless, his excitement evident as he stammered while pointing at the black car in the barn. John, with a smug look, corrected him. To be precise, it's a 1982 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. Jack didn't mind the thick layer of dust covering the car and tried to open the driver's door. Although the iconic red scanner light on the front was missing, the real disappointment came when he saw the interior. It lacked the flashy dashboard and the futuristic steering wheel. Sure, in this world, there were no sci-fi TV shows stitched into reality, no Night Industries, and no Kit running rampant in Los Santos. But as he traced his fingers over the car's sleek, flowing lines, Jack felt a pang of nostalgia that almost brought tears to his eyes. John completely misunderstood Jack's love for American muscle cars. Initially, it was more of a casual interest. Hannah's Ford Mustang Shelby GT500 had always made him envious, so he had been toying with the idea of getting a used muscle car for fun. Never in his wildest dreams did he expect John to find him such a gem from his childhood fantasies. Seeing Jack's infatuation, John worked his magic, chatting with the old man and even managed to haggle the price down by another $500. They paid a $200 deposit and arranged to return with a tow truck in a week before heading back. The barn is dry, and although the car hasn't been started in 30 years, it has less than 20,000 miles on the odometer. The body is in great shape. I even found a modification shop willing to restore it for just $2,000. John had thought of everything, but Jack had grander plans. As he Googled the car's details on his phone, new ideas began to take shape in his mind. Scene break. The Wilshire precinct was buzzing with activity. Not only was the outgoing Chief Anderson making a rare appearance, but Jack also spotted several familiar faces. David Rossi, dressed in a bespoke Italian suit, stood next to another unfamiliar middle-aged man beside Zoe. SWAT team Captain Hondo, whom Jack hadn't seen in a while, was also in the back of the conference room. Even Channel 8 News anchor Tyler Kelly was outside the meeting room, microphone in hand, waving enthusiastically at Jack with a cameraman in tow. Superintendent Gray, looking solemn, nodded in acknowledgement before stepping up to the podium. This morning at 5 a.m., the California Women's Center Prison initiated the transfer of prisoner 081316, known as Rosalind Dyer, a rare female serial killer. For 5 years, she's been held in solitary confinement. Today, she is being handed over to our precinct. Before I assign tasks, Special Agent David Rossi from the FBI and Assistant District Attorney Sean Delmont will provide background on Dyer. David Rossi exchanged a courteous nod with Superintendent Gray and then took the stage. His gaze swept over the audience, pausing briefly on Jack with a smile, as if to say, "I told you we'd meet again soon." Good morning, everyone. For those unfamiliar with this case, in 2015, Rosalind Dyer was captured by the FBI after torturing and killing 7 people. She was sentenced to death. However, evidence suggests there may be more victims. Even among the 7 known victims, 3 bodies have yet to be found. Today, thanks to the DA's efforts, we've reached an agreement with Dyer. She's agreed to lead the police to the hidden burial sites. Rossi's last words carried a peculiar tone. Although his English always had a slight Italian accent, Jack could swear there was a hint of irony in his voice. Chapter 86, The Beautiful Psychopath. As the tension in the room grew palpable, John couldn't help but interject from the audience, "Sorry to interrupt, sir, but what were the terms agreed upon with the prisoner?" David Rossi turned his gaze to Assistant District Attorney Sean Delmont, signaling for him to answer. "The terms are, her death sentence will be commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Tim immediately voiced his discontent from the back. "We're really going to bargain with a criminal like her?" Sean Delmont stepped forward, ready to showcase his well-honed skills in rhetoric and persuasion. "This isn't about leniency for the criminal. It's about providing closure to the victims' families, who have long awaited the return of their loved ones' remains." David Rossi, visibly displeased with the DA's office striking a deal with a serial killer, directly challenged the rationale. "And what about the families who supported her execution? They felt reassured when we apprehended Dyer in California precisely because the state enforces the death penalty. How do we explain this to them?" Sean Delmont glanced at Rossi with a hint of frustration. "I'm sorry, but this matter is beyond the FBI's jurisdiction. Why does she need to leave prison? Can't she just tell us the burial sites from there?" Jack interjected, pretending to be confused, to diffuse the brewing conflict. Rossi was likely to be his future superior, and clashing with the DA's office wouldn't be wise, especially since it was clear the DA held the upper hand in this situation, with the FBI and the police playing supporting roles. Sean Delmont explained, "She claims she can't recall the exact locations. Griffith Park spans 4,000 acres. Dyer says only by being on site can she retrace her memories to find the burial sites." Angela exchanged a knowing look with Neela and commented, "Sounds like she's just using this as an excuse to get out of prison. Planning an escape, and to start her killing spree again, Neela added in sync. Maybe, but Dyer knows if she fails to lead us to the bodies, the deal is off. Despite Sean Delmont's continued defense, the room filled with murmurs and eye rolls. It was clear that many saw the DA's maneuvering as a publicity stunt, especially with the Channel 8 reporter poised outside the conference room. Zoe, aware of her team's frustration, cleared her throat, bringing immediate silence to the room. All right, let's proceed with task assignments as outlined by Superintendent Gray. Superintendent Gray returned to the podium, acknowledging the constraints under which they were operating. First, we'll secure the precinct before the prisoner arrives. Suspend all detainee intake and transfer current detainees to the Twin Towers jail. Next, that troublesome beauty outside needs someone to keep an eye on her. It's time for Wilshire's youngest and most handsome officer to step up. Keep her in check, Jack, and make sure she doesn't stir up any trouble. Angela playfully mimicked a finger gun at Jack, softly saying pew to indicate he was in for it. Having been coerced into buying Angela a meal as hush money for Hannah's secret, Jack reluctantly headed to the armory for his gear. Of course, this was all in jest among friends. Given Hannah's popularity in the Wilshire precinct, Angela wasn't her only confidant. Does seeing me make you that unhappy? Tyler Kelly, looking particularly polished today, smiled radiantly at Jack, exuding a charming girl-next-door vibe. How did you get permission to film this? Or did you strike a deal with the DA? Jack's curiosity was piqued. It was almost unheard of for the police to allow media involvement in such matters. Tyler Kelly studied Jack seriously for a moment, a rare sincerity in her eyes. It seems Hannah is with you not just because of your good looks. You don't think I got this opportunity through my father's connections, do you? Jack held her gaze for a moment before responding. To become a lead anchor at Channel 8, it takes more than a pretty face and nepotism. While I don't know much about the news industry, I've met several capable professional women, and you certainly seem like one of them. Humph. Tyler Kelly snorted, slightly offended yet proud. Like Zoe, Hannah's sister. I suppose I'll take that as a compliment. Jack was a bit taken aback. Could Zoe be this young woman's idol? Then it hit him, given Zoe's current array of public personas, it was quite possible. Her open declaration of her sexuality alone was enough to earn the admiration of someone who might be LGBT. So, did Sean Delmont invite you guys? Is he trying to advance his career by dropping the assistant from his title? Tyler Kelly giggled without directly answering. Does Hannah often praise you for being smart? You can ask her yourself. She'll be back from Quantico soon. At that moment, the garage doors of the precinct slowly lifted, and a white prison van backed into the bay. As the side door opened, Superintendent Gray, John, David Rossi, and Sean Delmont stepped out together. Superintendent Gray. I'm Superintendent Conans. A balding middle-aged prison warden handed a stack of documents to the black-faced superintendent. The prisoner last ate at 6 o'clock and used the restroom 47 minutes ago. This means you won't need to worry about her biological needs for the next 2 hours, but you will. Hold on, what are these documents? Superintendent Gray asked, puzzled as he took the papers. The Eighth Amendment to the Constitution, prohibiting cruel and unusual punishment. The prisoner is now under your jurisdiction, so please conduct yourself accordingly. The prisoner is protected under the Bill of Rights and the Higher Education Equalization Act. Don't let yourself be sued. Superintendent Conan smirked as if he had successfully handed off a ticking time bomb. So, what exactly am I signing? Superintendent Gray, clearly unfamiliar with the situation, remained baffled. It's a sworn statement transferring custody of prisoner 081316 from me, Antonio Conans, Superintendent of the California Department of Corrections, to you, Wade Gray, Superintendent of the Los Angeles Police Department. Thanks. Superintendent Gray, looking resigned, signed the document and returned it to Conans. Okay, bring her out. Superintendent Conans ordered. The prison van door opened, and a middle-aged white woman with red hair, in her 40s, was escorted out. Chapter 87, LAPD on high alert. Jack's colleague, Tyler Kelly, quickly signaled to the cameraman behind her to focus the lens on the scene. Although Jack's memories from his previous life were quite hazy regarding this part of the storyline, he still had a vivid impression of Rosalind Dyer, who bore a striking resemblance to J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter. He glanced instinctively at Lucy, standing next to Tim. In this plot, Lucy was kidnapped by a fanatical admirer of the female serial killer and nearly buried alive. Jack needed to find a way to prevent such a calamity from happening. Given that Jack had already proven he could alter events through personal effort, like when he saved Zoe earlier, or that events could unfold on their own, such as Lucy and John advancing past their rookie phase ahead of schedule, it was best to nip potential dangers in the bud. Because who knows how much worse things could get. Jack's brain was racing. From what he remembered, Rosalind Dale's admirer only targeted women. In the storyline, he met Lucy, who was then single, at a bar. But now, with Lucy and Tim on the verge of starting a serious relationship, she was unlikely to go drinking with other men at a bar. So, if he were Rosalind Dale, who would he target next? He surveyed the room. Angela was pregnant and had been keeping to herself. Neera was tied up in a custody battle for her daughter, and Zoe was a police sergeant. Moreover, these three were all physically capable and sharp-minded. That weak admirer wouldn't stand a chance against them. Feeling a headache coming on, Jack decided not to guess anymore. This wasn't a game where he had to follow rules to the letter. "Hello, David." Still as charming as ever, said Rosalind Dale as she was wheeled down from the prisoner transport vehicle, restrained by various instruments. "Hello, Rosalind. Long time no see." David Rossi, probably accustomed to seeing many such psychopaths, greeted her as casually as he would a regular person, smiling and nodding. Rosalind scanned her surroundings and saw Lucy, Neera, Angela, Tim, and John standing in a row to her left, expressionless. She smiled slightly. "Not going to introduce your friends?" Sergeant Gray, with a stern look, snapped, "Their name tags are visible. Can't you read?" Sergeant Gray seems a bit unfriendly. "He won't make things difficult for me, will he?" If one ignored her murderous past, Rosalind's smile exuded a certain charm, making her quite the allure for some older men and women in their 40s or 50s. Why does she not look like a serial killer at all? Tyler Kelly nudged Jack lightly with her elbow and asked in a curious whisper. "Want me to arrange some alone time with her?" Seeing her horrified headshake, Jack's mouth curled into a wicked grin. At this moment, Sergeant Gray waved to a few officers. 3 female officers stepped forward and began unlocking the restraints on Rosalind's wheelchair. As Rosalind struggled to stand, she suddenly let out a cry and stumbled. John, quick on his feet, caught her. "Thank you." Rosalind smiled at John, her eyes lingering on his, causing him to hesitate before quickly looking away. "Here we go," Jack muttered to himself, slapping his forehead. The troublesome entanglement between the serial killer and good guy John had officially begun. Sergeant Gray announced that they would be departing in 20 minutes, and everyone at the station busied themselves. Jack inspected the vehicles and gear, and knowing they were heading into the mountains, he grabbed an Adidas sports bag from his locker, packed several bottles of water, and threw it into the trunk. Walking into the holding room, he found Neera conducting a body search on Rosalind, who maintained her smug demeanor and even provoked them with her words. "They already searched me in prison. Doing it again here at the station shows your professionalism. Once, I pulled out each tooth of a greedy anesthesiologist and cut off his hands that groped me. Using a hammer would have been easier, but there's a certain pride in doing things with professionalism. Don't you agree, Officer Nolan?" John remained impassive. "Ma'am, if you're trying to scare me with that story, you'll be disappointed." Jack scoffed, "She's not trying to scare you, she's flirting with you." Rosalind's pupils narrowed as she turned to look at Jack, who had just entered the room, her gaze stopping at his name tag. "Officer Taver. You're quite the handsome man. That lady reporter standing with you earlier suits you well." Jack flashed a big smile, showing his pearly whites. "Thanks. You must have been quite the looker when you were younger." He deliberately emphasized the word younger. A flash of anger crossed Rosalind's eyes as she turned away from him and looked back at Sean Del Monte, who was helping her into a bulletproof vest. "Hey, Sean, should we go look for that anesthesiologist's body first?" Sean Del Monte appeared indifferent. "Order doesn't matter as long as we recover all the victim's remains." Listen to that public servant tone. Turning her attention back to John, Rosalind continued, "Sean is just a timid mid-level bureaucrat, eager to push this through to take charge of the district attorney's office next year. Raise your hands, Nira interjected, breaking Rosalind's stream of words as she fitted the LAPD-marked bulletproof vest over her. Are we ready? At the door stood SWAT team leader Hondo, fully armed. Seeing Jack, the burly black man offered a fist bump and greeted him, bringing up again the invitation for Jack to visit the SWAT team. After their last encounter dealing with the Southern Front, Jack had forgotten about this. He quickly agreed, promising to bring some homemade food as a gift. As one of California's most notorious serial killers, Rosalind's transport was nothing short of grand. LAPD had deployed a SWAT armored vehicle for her transport and assigned mounted police to lead the way. Angela, as one of the precinct's top operatives, rode with Rosalind in the SWAT vehicle. Jack arranged for Tyler Kelly and her cameraman to follow in their vehicle, but just as he was about to start the engine, David Rossi opened the passenger door and got in. "Mind if I ride with you?" David Rossi asked in his distinctively elegant Italian accent. "Of course not." "It's an honor," Jack replied, waiting for Rossi to buckle up before setting off. Knowing that his future boss had something to discuss, Jack took the initiative to start the conversation. He also had some ideas that he needed this FBI bigwig to help execute. "Did you handle Rosalind Dale's capture back then?" David Rossi nodded. "This woman has classic antisocial personality disorder and exceptionally high intelligence and cunning. She's extremely dangerous. The DA reaching a deal with her was a mistake." Chapter 88, Climbing the Mountain, Part 1. "So you came to LA to prevent this from happening?" Jack asked, suddenly understanding the situation. "Yes, but I couldn't succeed. The district attorney's office bureaucrats are too eager to take action," Rossi replied, no longer concealing his concern from Jack. "She's definitely going to stir up trouble, and Del Monte is clearly overconfident." Jack nodded in agreement. "Unfortunately, we're forced to wait for her to make the first move. If you had the chance to strike first, what would you do?" Rossi asked, his tone suggesting he was both curious and testing Jack. Of course, the answer in Jack's mind was to eliminate her immediately. But he couldn't say that out loud. Given the scale of the operation this time, it wasn't convenient to take drastic measures. Jack actually had contemplated using underhanded tactics to get rid of this woman if not for the complexity involved. The accountant had contacted him yesterday, and now he was on his way to LA with his trailer and Justin. Feigning contemplation, Jack assumed the demeanor of a student thoughtfully answering a teacher's question. "I'd start by searching her cell and investigating all her recent contacts. As a death row inmate, she can't do much on her own from prison. To create chaos, she needs outside help. And a woman like Rosalind Dale, she's bound to have plenty of admirers." Adoring serial killers was indeed a peculiar feature in Western cultures. Almost every notorious serial killer had fans or copycats. Jack had found this phenomenon baffling until his own experiences in this world helped him understand that it seemed strongly linked to culture and religion. Rossi smiled, seemingly finding common ground with Jack. "I've already got FBI agents searching her cell." Jack showed a fittingly surprised expression, part genuine and part flattery for his future boss. Having spent 20 years in the workforce, Jack knew how to play the game. "Though it's likely we'll find nothing, Rosalind Dale isn't easy to outwit. Tell me more of your ideas." Jack's mind raced. His memory of the original plot was limited to Lucy's kidnapping. But now, with the absurd mashup of different storylines, even featuring David Rossi from Criminal Minds, who knew how things might veer off course? One thing was certain, though, the deranged old woman was bound to cause trouble. Is it possible that Rosalind has already set something up targeting the Wilshire division? Jack suggested, his thoughts aligning with the mounting tension. Rossi paused, somewhat taken aback by Jack's line of thought. Intrigued, he asked, "Why do you think that?" Following the lead vehicle at a steady pace, Jack elaborated confidently, "We all know that whatever Rosalind does, her goal is singular and clear. To gain her freedom and continue killing," Rossi agreed. "Escaping from prison isn't her best option. As a death row inmate, she's been tightly confined for 4 years. If escape was viable, she wouldn't have waited until now. So, she has only 2 paths: her accomplices attempt a rescue during this transfer, or she creates some doubt about her previous cases, delaying her execution and buying more time to find another opportunity. Are you putting yourself in her shoes?" Rossi didn't hide the admiration in his eyes. Jack was thrilled internally, but he knew this was the moment to push his real agenda. Given the LAPD's current state of alert, a forceful rescue seems almost impossible. She's a serial killer, not the leader of a major crime syndicate. Her admirers don't have the capability to break her out from under SWAT's watchful eyes. So, something must go wrong during this search for the victims' bodies. She needs to regain control. At that moment, Rossi's phone buzzed. As he glanced at it, he remarked, "Modern technology has progressed so much. We used to be glued to the office waiting for faxes. Now we can view evidence from anywhere as long as there's a signal." He showed Jack a photo displayed on his screen, depicting a corner of a cramped prison cell. "Tell me what you see." Jack took a quick look. In the center of the photo was a chocolate wrapper. This is how Rosalind communicates with the outside world. As a death row inmate, she can still have contact, but all communications are thoroughly monitored. However, the prison black market can't be completely shut down. Someone outside is sending her messages using this method. Rossi beamed. "You're sharper than I expected. Let's let her think she has the upper hand for now. It's her move next." Seizing the moment, Jack suggested, "Maybe we could take some preemptive measures." A long convoy of police cars, followed by a bunch of media vehicles, moved at a steady pace. After about 45 minutes, they arrived at their destination, the southern slopes of Griffith Park, via the winding mountain roads. The park rangers had already cordoned off the road. Apart from Tyler Kelly's news van, other media personnel were held back at the barricades. The convoy stopped in a forest clearing. Jack got out and retrieved a backpack filled with bottled water from the trunk, slinging it over his shoulder. He then checked his Glock and his spare firearm. Tyler Kelly had already swapped her shoes for a pair of sneakers and quickly fell in step beside Jack after getting out of the vehicle. "Do you think she might try to escape?" Tyler asked as Jack holstered his gun and pointed to the police helicopter overhead and the numerous LAPD officers around them. "Unless she wants to die, she won't get more than 10 steps away," Jack assured her. He then glanced over at Rossi, leaning against a police car. "Sir, aren't you coming up the mountain?" Rossi smiled and pointed to his Italian handcrafted shoes. "This is work for the younger folks." Jack's lips twitched in mild exasperation as he joined the others disembarking from the armored vehicle. Hondo commanded his team to spread out, taking charge of the outer perimeter security. The officers from the Wilshire Division gathered together under Sergeant Gray's lead, forming the core defense circle. Only Tim had an AR-15 slung over his shoulder as a precaution. Jack grabbed a too-eager Tyler Kelly by the arm. "Hey, don't try to chat with Rosalind, or you'll be stuck in the car." Tyler pouted but turned to signal her cameraman to follow. Soon, she brightened up like a child, saying, "It's a beautiful day for hiking." Jack looked up at the dissipating morning mist in the mountains, feeling slightly annoyed. Mount Wilson had a peak elevation of 1,700 meters, and they were only halfway up. They were about to enter the forest, and he wondered if this cheerful girl would still be as enthusiastic after an hour of trekking. At least her cameraman wouldn't be happy lugging around that hefty camera, which looked like it weighed close to 20 pounds. Chapter 89, Climbing the Mountain, Part 2. 40 minutes into their trek along the forest trail led by Rosalind, everyone's spirits had significantly dampened. The morning mist had long dissipated, and the sun now beat down intensely. The path was rough and challenging, but Rosalind's face remained bright with a relaxed smile. Lucy murmured to Tim, "I think she's toying with us. She probably just wanted us to join her for a hike." Tim agreed. "Yes, she's enjoying making the LAPD dance to her tune. It's all part of her game." Sean Del Monte, ever the righteous figure, said sternly, "If it means bringing closure to 3 families by finding their loved one's remains, then let her enjoy it. And then our esteemed assistant district attorney will get to bask in the spotlight on the evening news." Jack quipped quietly to Tyler Kelly, who was breathing heavily, her face flushed with sweat. Tyler, despite her exhaustion, replied, "Everyone gets what they want, right? Take a break." "There's still a long way to go," Rosalind announced as she stopped in a small clearing. Sergeant Gray picked up his radio. "All units, hold position. Take a break." Jack pulled out 2 bottles of water from his backpack and tossed them to Tyler and her cameraman. He opened a third for himself, taking a couple of swigs. John also pulled out a bottle from his pack. Rosalind lifted her shackled hands, indicating she needed help to drink. As John fumbled awkwardly, Nira rolled her eyes and took the bottle from him, offering it to Rosalind. Jack's sharp instincts alerted him to a disturbance nearby. He called out to Sergeant Gray, "Do we have anyone other than SWAT securing the perimeter?" Gray, having just downed a whole bottle of water, looked puzzled. "No, why? Did you spot something?" Jack's keen gaze cut through the trees, catching a glimpse of a shadowy figure about 20 or 30 meters away. "There's someone over there, but they seem to be in plain clothes." The group followed Jack's pointing finger, their eyes narrowing in confusion. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, the bullet whizzing just above Rosalind's head. John immediately tackled her to the ground while the rest of the team scrambled for cover. Only Sean Del Monte stood frozen, dumbstruck by the unfolding chaos. Almost simultaneously with the gunfire, Jack yanked Tyler Kelly to the ground, dragging her behind a thick tree stump and gesturing for her cameraman to take cover. "Stay here and don't move." Another shot rang out, this time striking a tree trunk near Del Monte. The flying splinters made him cry out in pain as he fell to the ground. "I'm hit. Somebody help me." The officers had no time for him, their focus on finding cover and returning fire. "Stay put." Jack ordered Tyler once more before signaling Tim. He made a hand gesture indicating they should flank the shooter from both sides. Angela's pregnancy was still a secret, so the only person Jack trusted implicitly in a combat situation was Tim, his former battle comrade. Tim nodded, understanding the plan. He ducked into the left side of the forest while Jack slipped into the right. Before diving into the woods, Jack gave Angela a quick signal, pointing to his eyes and then towards where Tim had gone. She nodded, understanding she needed to keep watch. Jack and Tim moved swiftly, circling behind the shooter. The assailant, a middle-aged black man armed with a carbine, was nervously reloading behind a large tree, unaware of the approach from behind. "Drop the gun. Put it on the ground and surrender." Jack and Tim shouted in unison. Hearing their voices, the officers at the front ceased fire to avoid any friendly casualties. "Hands on your head. Fingers interlocked. You're under arrest." Tim stood firm, his gun trained on the suspect. Jack holstered his Glock and pulled out handcuffs, quickly restraining the men kneeling on the ground. "Are there others with you?" Jack asked. The man, now calm but with a trace of despair in his voice, replied, "No, it's just me." Lucy approached and pulled the man to his feet, naively asking, "Were you trying to rescue Rosalind?" The man scoffed bitterly, "Rescue her? I'm here to kill her. She murdered my wife." In the forest clearing, Zoe didn't wait for the police cars to stop before jumping out and rushing towards the group. "What happened?" SWAT team leader Hondo looked displeased. "Someone managed to hide under a camouflage net and evaded my team's surveillance." Rossi pointed to the middle-aged man being loaded into a police car. "His name is Peter. The third victim of Rosalind Dyer was his wife. The police have only ever recovered half of her remains." John mumbled, almost to himself, "That family lost the mother, and now the father is going to prison." Tyler Kelly, having finished her live report via the news van's camera feed, stood quietly on the side, her eyes fixed on Zoe. Jack glanced at Tyler and then asked Rossi in a low voice, "Do you think all this was orchestrated by Rosalind?" Rossi looked towards the deranged old woman being led back into the armored vehicle. He snorted. "Didn't you notice her expression earlier? She's reveling in this. That ambush spot was definitely leaked to Peter by one of her associates. She's insane. If Peter's aim had been better, she'd be dead now," John said, struggling to understand the situation. Jack felt he had underestimated Rosalind. Maybe Peter was chosen precisely because someone knew he lacked shooting experience. Just then, Sergeant Gray and a bandaged Del Monte approached. "Maybe we should call it a day," Sergeant Gray suggested to Zoe. "Absolutely not." Del Monte immediately protested. "Listen, Captain Anderson, if we stop now, we'll be back here next week or next month, with twice as many people and media swarming all over the place." Zoe rubbed her temples, acknowledging the sense in Del Monte's argument. "Fine. We'll keep going. Everyone, stay vigilant. I'll arrange for additional police support." It was already midday. The group had a quick bite before preparing to set off again. Jack was surprised to see Rossi joining them this time. He glanced at Rossi's expensive leather shoes. "Let's bet." "I give it less than 15 minutes for Rosalind to lead us to the burial site," Rossi shrugged. The group continued through the forest, with Rosalind chattering incessantly, trying to engage John in conversation. "I've been thinking. You saved my life earlier. I haven't thanked you yet. I almost skinned Peter's wife alive. Why would you protect someone as heinous as me?" Even the normally good-natured John couldn't hide his disgust. "It's my duty. I'm just doing my job, whether it's for you or anyone else." Chapter 90, Searching the Mountain, Part 2. Rosalind seemed completely unaware. "Oh, how amusing, people look at me as if I'm a monster. I see them the same way. Killing has nothing to do with brutality, and saving lives isn't necessarily out of kindness." She kept smiling until her gaze met Jack's, causing her expression to stiffen slightly. This young officer's eyes held no anger, no disgust, no fear. He just looked at her calmly, as if she were a lifeless object. Rosalind's mouth twitched, forcing a smile back onto her face. She casually glanced at Tyler Kelly standing next to Jack. Officer Tavler seems to have quite the charm with the opposite sex. Huh. Jack thought to himself, why drag me into this? He discreetly shut down his system in his mind, refocusing his gaze. He had been contemplating whether to save up enough system coins to upgrade his rifle skills. After all, he'd likely undergo training at Quantico like Hannah mentioned. She said there were many experts there. His skills with a handgun and in combat were already at a proficient level, definitely better than half of the people there, but his rifle skills left much to be desired. Don't bother me. You're too old for my taste. I don't like the rough texture. Tyler Kelly glanced down at her arm instinctively. She had just gotten a beauty treatment, and her skin was smooth and fair. Rosalind snorted, deciding not to waste any more words. The group continued their difficult trek through the forest. This time, it didn't take long before Rosalind stopped under a tree, signaling they had arrived. Jack clicked his tongue. Rossi, the seasoned agent, seemed to know his stuff. Haha, this is the place. I buried the anesthesiologist at the roots of this tree. I even used anesthetics on him, put it in his iced tea. Isn't that a bit ironic? Then, I watched the sunset with him while chopping off his hands and feet. It was quite a memorable day. Everyone ignored Rosalind's gruesome rambling. Inspector Gray signaled to start digging. John and Tim took portable shovels from their backpacks and began excavating at the base of the tree. Jack, meanwhile, took Tyler Kelly and her cameraman aside. After the cameraman captured some footage of the digging, Jack instructed him to turn off the camera. Filming was prohibited from that point onward. Found something. John hadn't dug much before he uncovered bones. With a push, he cleared a layer of dirt, revealing a skeleton almost entirely reduced to white bones. No hands or feet. It's the anesthesiologist, John said, his voice tinged with excitement. Other officers, including the assistant prosecutor Del Monte, visibly relaxed. Something's not right, muttered Inspector Gray, the most experienced among them, frowning deeply. Beside him, David Rossi displayed the same evaluative expression he had when assessing Jack earlier. Officer Tavler, what do you think? Jack stepped forward, joining them. In a low voice, he remarked, the body is buried too shallowly, less than 2 feet deep. And besides some clothing, there's nothing wrapping it. Griffith Park has coyotes at night and other small carnivores with keen senses. If this were the primary burial site, it would have been dug up long ago, with bones scattered everywhere. Jack recalled a TV show he had seen in a previous life called 6 Feet Under, which was about a family in the funeral business in the USA. In Western culture, 6 feet is the standard burial depth, similar to the concept of 9 layers underground in other cultures. This depth wasn't arbitrary, only a sufficiently deep burial prevents wild animals from digging up the body. Ah. Nearby, Lucy, who had been helping to clear dirt while wearing gloves, suddenly screamed and fell back onto the ground. Tyler Kelly, who had been curiously peeking, covered her mouth and stepped back. The group gathered around to find another body beside the skeleton John had discovered. This body was in a semi-decomposed state, emitting a nauseating stench. Inspector Gray took one look and made a quick assessment. 6 months, no more than 9. All eyes turned towards Rosalind. Don't look at me. I've been in prison for the past 4 years. The deranged old woman laughed gleefully, like a chess player who had just gained the upper hand. Separation line. How is this possible? The only person who knew where Rosalind hid the bodies was herself, and she's been locked up for 4 years. How could there be a body killed less than a year ago at the same spot? On the way back to the station, Tyler Kelly abandoned her cameraman and squeezed into Jack's police car, bombarding him with questions like a curious child. Jack sighed and glanced at her. Haven't you had enough for today? You must know something. I noticed that only you and that old handsome guy from the FBI didn't look too surprised. Tyler Kelly's face showed a hint of pleading, revealing that today's unexpected findings were not enough to satisfy a reporter's insatiable curiosity. If Miss Kelly wants to be locked in the holding cell until we solve the case, I don't mind telling you some inside information. Tyler Kelly pouted, seeming a bit disappointed, but soon perked up. Call me Tyler. We're friends now, right? Seeing she had stopped trying to pry information out of him, Jack decided to go along with it. All right, Tyler. Since we're friends now, can you share some of your thoughts? You could lock me in your place instead. Ha, women. Jack chuckled coldly, deciding to ignore this cheeky lady's wishful thinking. Back at the Wilshire police station, Jack took Tyler straight to Zoe's office, hoping Captain Anderson could handle this restless journalist. Just as he was leaving Zoe's office, Jack was called over by Rossi, who was approaching. Jack, mind if I call you that? Of course not. What do you need me to do? Jack maintained his respectful demeanor. With the case taking such a dramatic turn, Assistant Prosecutor Del Monte had finally realized that he had been manipulated by Rosalind and stopped trying to assert his presence. Naturally, David Rossi, the supervising FBI agent, took control of the case and began issuing directives. Inspector Gray agreed to assign you as my assistant. Come join us in the meeting. Rossi seemed to remember something and pulled out a small box from his pocket, handing it to Jack. These are the tracking devices you requested. The FBI's LA field office just delivered them. They're all in here. Jack opened the box to find a dozen or so small black discs, about the size of buttons, along with a tablet. Chapter 91, Dr. Temperance Brennan. You can use this tablet for GPS tracking. These devices emit a low-frequency signal every 30 seconds. Even if buried 20 meters underground, they can be detected within a 1-mile radius. Jack gratefully thanked Rossi. It was advantageous to have such high-tech support. The LAPD didn't have such advanced tools. He picked up one of the trackers from the box and handed it to Rossi. Rossi looked slightly surprised. Jack shrugged, explaining that it was better to be safe than sorry. You were the one who originally captured her, after all. In the briefing room, the officers who had accompanied Rosalind up the mountain were gathered, discussing the situation. Inspector Gray stood aside, arms crossed. Is it possible that it's just a coincidence, that another killer happened to bury a body in the same spot? John speculated. Tim, who had the second most experience after Inspector Gray, dismissed the idea. Rosalind must have an accomplice on the outside. She disclosed the burial location to them. Nara shook her head. That's unlikely. She's on death row and held in solitary confinement. All her external communications are strictly monitored. It's possible to convey subtle messages, but conspiring would require frequent and detailed information exchanges, which are hard to hide. Del Monte nodded in agreement. Since she's been incarcerated, she's had no visitors other than her lawyer. Angela, clearly disdainful of the assistant prosecutor, asked, "Who's her lawyer? Is there a chance they're acting as a go-between?" Absolutely not. I know her lawyer. He's a man of integrity and would never get involved in something like this. Even their meetings are closely monitored. Del Monte's response was firm, though his expression showed some irritation. Besides, the FBI thoroughly searched Rosalind's cell before we headed to Griffith Park and found nothing. Who told you we found nothing? David, Rossi and Jack walked into the meeting room. Jack, why don't you share what we know and your thoughts? Jack didn't hesitate. Rossi's evaluative approach was clear, and it was crucial for Jack's potential future with the FBI. In such situations, showing modesty wouldn't be wise in the American context. During the FBI's search of Rosalind's cell, they found a chocolate wrapper. This indicates that even a death row inmate in solitary confinement can access the prison's black market. Considering she's been in there for 4 years, it's likely she had enough time to plan and coordinate her accomplice's actions. The 2 bodies we found were probably reburial sites. They weren't buried deep and hadn't been there long, perhaps only since last night. Inspector Gray likely noticed this as well. The dark-skinned inspector nodded. Yes, the new body was too intact. It must have been stored in a relatively sealed container before. Normally, if a body is buried directly in the ground, it would suffer significant damage from soil insects and small animals even if not found by scavengers. So, Rosalind must have somehow communicated the original burial sites to her accomplice. The accomplice then exhumed the remains, reburied them, and added a new victim. Why would they do that? Just to toy with the police? Lucy wondered. It's more than just toying with the police. Del Monte looked grim. With the media involved, this news will spread quickly. If we can't solve the case soon, Rosalind gains leverage for negotiation. Her next goal might be to push for parole. The looks directed at Del Monte by the others became less friendly. Inspector Gray snorted. Let me guess, inviting the media to follow and report, that was Rosalind's idea or her hint, wasn't it? Del Monte's face darkened to match Gray's as he fell silent. What an idiot, Jack thought to himself, this guy's career is over. Rossi gave Del Monte a similarly displeased look and continued. Due to the LAPD's forensic team being stretched thin and the urgency of the situation, I've contacted the Jeffersonian Institute's anthropology department. Dr. Temperance Brennan and her team will handle the autopsies of the 2 bodies. Rossi noticed John looking like he wanted to say something and gestured for him to speak. Ah, the Dr. Temperance Brennan you mentioned is my ex-wife's sister. We haven't seen each other in a long time. Everyone turned to John in surprise. Jack could hardly believe it. In American TV shows, crossovers are common, but this twist on their relationship was unexpected. Jack wanted to ask John if he also had a brother in New York writing best-selling novels, given the actor who played John was the same one who played the lead in Castle. Rossi nodded. Their plane will land in 2 hours. Officer Nolan, you'll handle the pickup. But before that, we need you to persuade Rosalind to reveal the other 2 burial sites. I'm worried there might be additional bodies there as well. Why me? John looked confused. Everyone stared at him, thinking he was being deliberately obtuse. Lucy nudged John with a smile. Don't you think she's quite taken with you? Didn't you notice? Everyone, including the still downcast Del Monte, nodded in agreement. As the mood in the room lightened, Jack shook his head, focusing back on the case. So, our immediate goal is to catch Rosalind's accomplice as soon as possible. Until we get the autopsy results, we only have one lead to follow, finding the head of the prison black market and getting a name from them. Additionally, Jack handed out the tracking devices to everyone in the room. Given Rosalind's long-standing plans, I believe she has likely researched everyone she has come into contact with. To prevent any surprises, all of you should carry one of these. Angela frowned, examining the small black disc. You mean that crazy woman might be targeting us? What about our families? Are they in danger? My advice is to alert any relatives nearby in Los Angeles to be extra cautious. Also, keep these trackers close at all times. Nara and Angela nonchalantly unbuttoned their uniforms, placing the small discs inside their bras. Lucy, blushing, didn't follow suit. She glanced at the men in the room and mumbled, I'll put mine on in the locker room later. Chapter 92, First Encounter with Bones. Inspector Gray clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. All right, here's the plan. Nolan, your job is to get Rosalind to reveal the remaining 2 burial sites. After that, you'll pick up Dr. Brennan and her team. Officers Bradford, Lopez, and Harper, use your contacts to find out who's running the black market in the California Women's Center. Then he turned to Jack. Officer Tavler, come to my office. As they entered, Gray closed the door and asked gravely, Agent David Rossi from the FBI has been asking a lot about you. Do you know why? Jack nodded. With the potential transfer now on the table, it wasn't necessary to keep it a secret. Rossi's interest was too evident, and others had likely noticed as well. I'm set to complete my bachelor's degree early this year. Dr. Cahill, from the EAP Counseling Center, wants me to pursue a master's in psychology under her guidance and recommended me to David Rossi. Rossi is a veteran from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, or BAU. He's rebuilding a team and has invited me to join. Dr. Cahill. You mean Maureen Cahill? Gray's expression turned peculiar. Clearly, he knew of his boss's same-sex partner. Jack nodded, feeling slightly uneasy. I told Rossi that you're the most outstanding young officer I've seen. Quick thinking, competent, and you've saved my life. I assured him that he made the right choice. Gray's voice rose slightly. This was the first time Jack had heard his superior praise him in private. It had to be admitted that his direct superior was a rare and excellent leader, supportive of his subordinates. Gray backed him in his attempt to become a sergeant, advocated for Nara's visitation rights for her daughter, and even publicly admitted his past prejudice against John, apologizing earnestly. Jack's gratitude was genuine. Thank you, Commander. Truly, thank you. Gray waved off his thanks. When Captain Anderson picked you three for the precinct, I didn't understand. One was too young and inexperienced, one was old and in a midlife crisis, and then there's Chen, Lucy, a seemingly delicate Asian woman. But now, I must admit, the captain has a discerning eye for talent that I lack. It's unfortunate she's leaving the precinct too. Seeing Gray's mixed emotions, Jack shared the sentiment. Commander, I want you to know it's been an honor to be under your command. Gray quickly composed himself. All right, back to work. Rosalind is cunning and ruthless. We must give this our all. Close the door on your way out. Leaving the office, Jack saw Tyler peeking around the hallway, and his head ached at the sight. Why are you still here? It was already 3 p.m. Jack didn't watch Channel 8's news, but the 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. slot was when most stations aired their news. I'm heading back to the station soon. I just wanted to thank you for saving me earlier. Tyler blinked, looking somewhat endearing. Take this. Jack handed her the last tracking device. He wouldn't need it himself. If Rosalind's accomplice came after him, it would be welcome. Tyler was involved with them all day, and Rosalind's insistence on having the media along might have had ulterior motives beyond publicity. It was better to be safe. What's this? Tyler examined the small black disc curiously. A tracking device from the FBI. Rosalind is plotting something, and I'm worried it might involve you. You seem to care a lot about me, Tyler said with a teasing smile. Fortunately, she didn't go into a dramatic self-righteous spiel and tried to stuff the device into her purse. Keep it close to you. And return it when you're done. Jack ignored her playful remarks but reminded her anyway. Tyler's blue eyes sparkled as she undid her top and slipped the small disc into her cleavage. She patted herself. Is this good enough? Are you and Angela taught by the same instructor? Separation line. John's plan to coax Rosalind, let's call it a charm offensive, succeeded beyond expectations. In the observation room behind the one-way glass, Jack shuddered. The LAPD's forensic team spent 3 hours retrieving 2 more sets of bones from the second burial site Rosalind revealed. Jack drove Rossi to the coroner's office. John, how's it going? Jack asked as he arrived, seeing John talking to a white woman. We just got here. This is Temperance, my ex-wife Sarah's sister. Rossi naturally knew Temperance Brennan, greeting her warmly. Thanks for helping out, Bones. Don't call me Bones. And who's this? Brennan's eyes lit up as she looked at Jack. I'm Jack Tavler from the LAPD. You can call me Jack. Dr. Brennan, I've read your book, Bred in the Bone. It's excellent. Do you have Asian ancestry? I see Mongoloid features in your facial structure. Brennan pondered, her hands touching Jack's cheeks. Yes. I'm a quarter Capricious. Jack took a half step back, casting a pleading look at John. Temperance, let's talk about the bodies. John awkwardly steered Brennan into the autopsy room, where 4 stainless steel tables held bodies in varying states of decay. A slender white man was carefully picking insects off one body, placing them into test tubes. A woman, dressed as if she had just returned from a Hawaiian vacation, was at a computer, working on a 3D reconstruction of a skull. This is Dr. Jack Hodgins, an entomologist who also specializes in microbiology and mineralogy. Angela Montenegro, our artist and computer expert, excels in 3D modeling. Brennan introduced her team. Jack Hodgins was deeply focused on his task, not even looking up, while Angela Montenegro, spotting the three men, appeared delighted, clearly a veteran member of the Looks Matter Club. Let's discuss the bodies. We're pressed for time. Rossi cut straight to the point. Chapter 93, The Old Zoo. The two bodies just brought to the autopsy table will take some time to examine. Let me first go over the preliminary information for the two bodies we've already processed. Brianna quickly switched to her professional mode, speaking more rapidly. The male body matches the data you provided. It has been buried for at least 5 years, almost completely skeletonized, with missing hands and feet. Biological samples have already been sent to the lab for DNA analysis. Higgins raised a finger to indicate he had something to add. I've examined the insect remains on the male body and compared the soil composition, particularly the characteristics of the Diptera larvae. Just give us the conclusions in plain English, Rossi interrupted, familiar with their tendency for long-winded explanations. Higgins rolled his eyes, somewhat reluctantly summarizing, your suspicions were correct. This body was reburied, no more than 3 days ago. The exact timing still needs further confirmation. Rossi nodded and pointed to the two completely skeletonized bodies. These two are known victims. We have ample time to wait for DNA test results. Our priority now is to identify the two more recent female bodies and look for clues that could lead us to the killer. Brianna led them to the first body discovered at the initial site. Jack, despite the overpowering stench, took a closer look. The body had been partially cleaned, with fragments of clothing collected and placed in a nearby dish. I've only done a preliminary examination, so I don't have much information yet. This body is of a woman under 30, who suffered greatly before her death. Brianna pointed to the face of the corpse. There are petechiae around the face, consistent with asphyxiation, but there are no ligature marks. The thyroid cartilage is intact, with no signs of fractures, but the facial area shows signs of internal bleeding, indicating the victim screamed for hours before death. Jack, though only a novice in forensic science, could still identify some obvious features. Was she buried alive? I noticed severe damage to her fingernails. Brianna shook her head. Not necessarily buried alive. Any sealed container can cause asphyxiation. I found paint fragments under her nails. A chill ran through everyone as they envisioned a young woman trapped in a sealed oil drum, screaming and clawing in vain, eventually dying of asphyxiation while the killer listened, deriving pleasure from her agony. The killer is a copycat, likely a fan of Rosalind. They both take pleasure in the victim's dying struggles, gaining psychological satisfaction from their torment. Though their methods differ, their goals are the same. Jack wasn't skilled in psychological profiling yet, but he could put himself in the character's shoes and quickly offered a simple analysis. John's face was the most troubled, as he was naturally empathetic. Oh, right, there's something you might find interesting. Brianna took out a UV light and shone it on the skin of the corpse's chest. John leaned in, straining to make out the faint tattoo. DOD 8918. What does that mean? Day of death, August 9, 2018, which is tomorrow, 6 months ago. Rossi's face darkened as he explained. Brianna, could we check the other, more recent body? Jack suggested, feeling a hunch. Brianna nodded and swiftly moved to the second body. She used scissors to cut away the clothing and examine the skin. Although the body was already past its decomposition peak, it was still discernible that the victim had been a young woman. On the abdomen, DOD 11918. Everyone exchanged looks of growing unease. The date on the first body and the second body are 3 months apart. Following this pattern, John voiced what everyone was thinking. Tomorrow, there will be another victim, and only then will Rosalind tell us where the third burial site is. This is her plan. Rossi's face had grown even grimmer. Is she trying to propose a deal? It's as if she's holding someone hostage now, John speculated. Jack shook his head. She won't say anything. She's just waiting, enjoying this, relishing our anxiety and helplessness. These emotions feed the demon within her. John looked helplessly at Rossi, who nodded, confirming Jack's analysis. John's face turned pale. Rossi, however, remained composed and continued questioning Brianna. Dr. Brianna, can you find the crime scene through trace evidence comparison or something similar? Brianna shook her head. We need time. We can't even confirm the identities of the two victims yet. I can't even take fingerprints. Rehydrating the skin for fingerprinting will take at least 2 hours, and DNA testing will take even longer. Jack scratched his nose awkwardly. This wasn't the time to hold back. He pointed to the chest of the body before them. The victim probably had breast implants. If we retrieve them, the serial number might help us quickly identify her. Despite the grim atmosphere, Jack noticed the others looking at him oddly. Aha, found it. Higgins suddenly exclaimed from where he was working with a microscope, drawing everyone's attention. What did you find? John asked eagerly. A fungus. I found these spores on the clothes and under the nails of the first victim. It's a mycorrhizal fungus unique to South Asian tropical forests. Now I've found the same fungus on the second victim's clothes. What does this mean? Did both victims visit South Asian tropical forests? John was puzzled. A tropical botanical garden or a zoo with Asian elephants, maybe. Los Angeles has something like that, right? Higgins asked, looking up. You mean the killer tattooed the victims in a public botanical garden or zoo, then trapped them in an iron barrel to enjoy their death throes? As John dismissed the idea, Jack's mind clicked. He suddenly remembered something. Not a botanical garden, but a zoo. An abandoned zoo. There's an old zoo in Los Angeles that was closed in the 1960s. It's been left to decay ever since, isolated from the world. It came back to him now. In the original storyline, John found and rescued the third victim there, getting beaten up in the process, allowing the killer to escape. This led to the subplot where Lucy was kidnapped. John slapped his forehead. You know the old zoo too. I visited it when I first came to LA. It's very close to Griffith Park. Chapter 94, The Faceless Men. The tense atmosphere at the scene seemed to dissipate instantly. Rossi, smiling, urged the pair, what are you waiting for? Get moving and take plenty of backup. Even if it's an abandoned zoo, it's still a large area. Jack nodded, and he and John returned to the station to gather some gear. It was already close to 8 p.m. Though the station didn't have the high-tech head-mounted night vision goggles of SWAT, they had extra high-powered flashlights, which would be sufficient. Tim and the others were still out, busy with the case, preparing for a night raid to capture the head of the prison's underground market. Unable to bring them along, Jack and John enlisted Lucy and some officers who had been called back for overtime by Captain Gray. A team of 12, in 6 police cars, headed to the abandoned old zoo. They were expecting aerial support from a police helicopter arriving later. The old zoo had been abandoned for over half a century. The wire fences were in disrepair, and the 2 gates were barely hanging on. To avoid alarming any potential suspects inside, the officers entered through a gap in the fence. The surroundings were pitch dark. The abandoned zoo was eerily silent, with only the occasional distant hoot of an owl in the forest, adding to the spooky atmosphere. This place is huge. How are we supposed to search it? John whispered. Jack thought for a moment, trying to use his heightened senses to scan the area but found nothing. We need to go inside. If the suspect has been killing here, there should be some traces left from at least 6 months ago. He paused and looked at the dilapidated facilities around them, an idea forming. There shouldn't be any electricity here, right? John glanced back, the transformer outside has been dead for ages. Even the homeless don't come here anymore. So the suspect would either have to use a car's generator for power or install a small generator here. Both methods would make noise. They can block out the light, but not the sound, right? The officers, catching on, spread out to explore the deeper parts of the zoo, listening for any noise that could indicate a running generator. Soon, Lucy reported quietly over the radio, northwest direction. There's a reptile exhibit building. I hear a generator running and can see faint lights inside. The group converged on the location, splitting up to surround the building to prevent any escape through the back door or windows. The rest prepared to enter through the front. Just as John got ready to kick the door in, Jack grabbed his arm. Jack gently turned the rusty doorknob. The old wooden door creaked open slowly. John sheepishly tilted his head, realizing he had let the spooky atmosphere get to him. Holding his gun in both hands, Jack took the lead, moving quietly. The building was divided into several sizable rooms, lined with rusty metal cages. The connecting doors between rooms were long decayed. Someone had roughly tidied up, moving the rotten doors aside and hanging a few pieces of soft plastic sheeting in the doorways to serve as makeshift barriers. Jack cautiously lifted one of the curtains. He felt more confident that their assumptions were correct. The clear curtains, though filthy and hanging for some time, were free of spider webs, indicating recent human activity. The windows were covered in layers of advertising posters and old newspapers, intact glass beneath. Homeless people wouldn't bother with such meticulous work, suggesting they were indeed in the right place. As they moved through 3 or 4 more rooms, a faint stench became stronger. Dim light seeped from the last room. Jack gestured silently, and Lucy slipped past him, pressing herself against the door frame and carefully lifting the plastic curtain for him. Standing at the doorway, Jack saw a heap of cages but could make out a metal bed frame in the center of the room. A woman, naked from the waist up, lay on it, seemingly semi-conscious, emitting low moans. A man, his back to the door, squatted by the bed, muttering unintelligibly, head bent over the woman, fiddling with something. Jack aimed his Glock at the man and crept closer until he was confident in his range. He then shouted, "LAPD, hands up." The man spun around. In the dim light, Jack saw a face without features. Bang. Despite the spooky atmosphere of the abandoned zoo at night, Jack wasn't particularly tense. But the sight of the faceless man nearly made him jump out of his skin, causing him to reflexively pull the trigger. The faceless man's head exploded, and he fell to the ground, lifeless. Only then did Jack realize the man was wearing a bag over his head, with 2 holes cut out for eyes. Jack nudged the body with his foot. The man's right hand opened, revealing a bloody tattoo gun. The woman on the bed had a bleeding abdomen, partially tattooed with the letters DOD, with the numbers yet to be completed. Lucy quickly moved to check on the woman's condition. "Is she okay?" Jack asked. "She's alive. This son of a bitch injected her with something, probably a sedative or a drug," Lucy replied, checking the woman's pupils with a flashlight. Jack radioed in, 7A26, "We need an ambulance, urgent. Clear the way and notify Duty Commander Gray and FBI Special Agent in Charge David Rossi. We found a victim, still alive. Suspect is down." After finishing the call, Jack scanned the room and found the source of the foul smell. A large oil drum stood against the wall, its interior covered in bloody scratch marks, reminiscent of the damage to the fingernails on the previous victims' bodies. This must be the barrel the killer used to suffocate the victims. The officers who followed John inside shuddered at the sight and the thought of the victim's suffering. One officer kicked the suspect's body over, searching for identification, while others continued to sweep the area inside and out. A police helicopter had arrived, illuminating the scene with its spotlight. They had to be sure the suspect wasn't working alone. Shortly, an ambulance arrived. The semi-conscious female victim was taken to the hospital, with Lucy accompanying her. Jack and John waited until the LAPD forensic team arrived to take over the scene before returning to the station. Despite it being midnight, there was still much to sort out. When they arrived, they found everyone assembled in the briefing room. Rossi stood before a large whiteboard covered with photos and a mind map. Seeing Jack and John enter, Rossi motioned for them to sit and continued his analysis of the case. Chapter 95, The Deceptive Serpent. Rossi stood before the team, holding up a small note encased in an evidence bag, displaying it for everyone to see. The note was covered in a dense array of numbers. Rosalind and her followers crafted a slew of false leads to mislead us. Let's start by discussing the search of her prison cell. I knew Rosalind had a habit of reading, so after we searched her cell, I had FBI agents check all the books she borrowed in the past 6 months. Inside one of the novels, we found this note. Captain Gray took the evidence bag and glanced at it. It's a simple substitution cipher. The numbers on the corners indicate the book's page number, and the ones below are the line numbers. Rossi nodded. Correct. The agent on site quickly deciphered it. It spells out a name, Brian Coleman. John raised his hand in confusion. But the guy Jack shot at the scene was identified as Caleb White. His driver's license had that name. Rossi signaled for patience. Yes, this was Rosalind's first trap. We raided Brian Coleman's residence and found his walls plastered with photos of the victims. However, FBI records show that Brian Coleman had been missing for some time. If we had followed this lead further. At that moment, Captain Gray's phone beeped. He checked it and spoke gravely. The forensic team just discovered a recently buried body near the old zoo. Fingerprints confirm it's Brian Coleman. The room buzzed with murmurs. It was clear that Brian Coleman was merely an unlucky scapegoat. If not for Dr. Brianna's team's lead to the old zoo, they might still be chasing Brian Coleman all over the city. Next is the second trap. Rossi's gaze shifted to Tim and his group. The LAPD traced the underground black market operation in the women's prison to Benjamin Lacey, a mid-level gang leader. He gave us another name, Jerry Javier, who records show worked as a guard in the women's prison in 2017, the same one where Rosalind was held. Tim, looking annoyed but compliant, added, "We raided Jerry Javier's place with the SWAT team, only to find the guy is disabled, with only one functioning leg. He did work as a prison guard, but 5 years ago, he was severely injured in a prison riot, leaving him nearly paralyzed from the waist down. He claimed his identity was stolen 3 years ago, and his personal credit history was in shambles." Rossi redirected the focus to the photo of Caleb White on the whiteboard. The FBI traced Jerry Javier's credit card records for the past 2 years and found a purchase of a small diesel generator, matching the model found at the old zoo. Captain Gray summarized, "We can now confirm that Caleb White was Rosalind's true accomplice. 3 years ago, he stole Jerry Javier's identity to infiltrate the women's prison and get close to Rosalind." Jack chuckled. "That explains it. Rosalind was using her manipulative tactics to form a cult-like following. Caleb White could be considered her first disciple. No wonder she kept rambling on. John, she probably had you pegged as her next target." All eyes turned to John, whose face turned red. Angela teased with a grin, "Better watch out, John. That seductive viper's bite is deadly." Captain Gray, in a good mood, looked at John. "Rosalind will be transported back to prison tonight. Her deal with the DA is off the table. If you still want to talk to her, now's your chance." John shook his head vigorously. Jack, however, stood up and pulled out another evidence bag. "I'll go see her. I have something here that I'm sure will delight her." Captain Gray nodded, allowing the meeting to adjourn. "Get some rest, everyone. You've all worked hard." As everyone got up to leave, they handed Jack their FBI tracking devices. No one wanted to carry those around now that the case was closed. I'm still missing one. I gave it to that Channel 8 news anchor. I'll get it back from her tomorrow." Jack collected the devices and handed them to Rossi. The older agent gave Jack an amused pat on the shoulder, clearly misinterpreting the situation. Jack didn't bother to correct him and quickly headed to the holding cell. He stood before Rosalind, who looked distinctly less composed than before, her facade of calm shattered. Jack stared at her, expressionless, and began, "We rescued the third victim. She's being treated at the hospital, and your follower Caleb is dead." Jack didn't aim to boast to a serial killer. Instead, he felt a strange mix of thoughts, wanting to see her one last time. This woman had meticulously plotted for so long, setting intricate traps. Yet, Brianna's forensic team's intervention and Jack's involvement had disrupted her plans in a straightforward manner. It was almost poetic justice. Jack vaguely remembered that Rosalind had more than one admirer. There was a breakout attempt later on, but he had only skimmed through the plot on Billy while gaming, so the details were hazy. Now, with the situation under control, he thought it might be worth provoking her a bit, just in case she planned any future moves. By the time she resurfaced, he would be a seasoned FBI agent with enhanced skills. Stirring her up now might ensure she comes after him again, giving him a chance to handle her more decisively. Rosalind's face twisted in a grimace. The smug smile was gone, replaced by a clenched teeth frustration. Such a disappointment. Jack felt this wasn't enough. He needed to push her further, to see if he could make her truly lose her composure. Your story ends here. You'll be forgotten by the world, rotting away in that tiny private cell. No. Rosalind suddenly lifted her head, a smile returning to her face. There's still the third burial site I haven't disclosed, more bodies, more graves. I can continue to make deals with the DA. Sooner or later, some ambitious bureaucrat will agree. You're too young to understand this now, but you'll learn. Everyone grows up eventually, right? Chapter 96, The Girl in Your Hands. Jack's lips curled into a mocking smile as he lifted the evidence bag, flaunting its contents. Sorry, but look at what I found. This is Caleb White's diary. Your admirer here wasn't exactly a saint. He's documented every case you discussed with him, every murder, every burial site, all your secrets. So, no more deals, and there won't be any police escorts taking you on scenic mountain hikes. If I were you, I'd find some other hobbies. You're going to have a lot of time to enjoy alone. Rosalind finally snapped. Her face twisted with rage as she screamed at Jack, "You're dead. I will find a way out, I swear. And when you fall into my hands, you will suffer beyond measure, groveling at my feet. Like a worm, begging with your tongue on my toes for a quick death. You're too old." Jack threw out the strange remark as he left the room, signaling the guards behind him to take her away. Jack wasn't worried about provoking terrorists. They could strike from a distance with snipers or bombs, something he couldn't handle right now. But he had no qualms about bullying a weak serial killer who only preyed on the vulnerable. If this old woman somehow managed to escape and come after him, Jack wouldn't mind adding a few pounds to her body weight in an instant. The next morning, Jack was woken up by a call from Christian Wolf, also known as the accountant. Jack's sleep had become increasingly short, and sleeping in was now just a way to adjust his mood. After witnessing the horrific conditions of the victims from the previous day's case, he needed the rest to cope with the mental toll. Having finished his morning routine and tidied up the guest room, Jack saw Christian pull up in a Ford Raptor with a trailer in tow. It barely fit into the backyard, crushing a part of his vegetable garden, much to Jack's dismay. The guest room was prepared for Justin. It took Christian a good while to coax her out of the car, and Jack, seeing no other option, went out to buy a baby monitor to place in the room. This way, even if Christian slept in his RV, he could keep an ear on her. Justin's issues were much more severe, and Jack doubted she would be able to interact normally with people anytime soon. Unlike Christian, who could blend in despite his condition, Jack wasn't confident Justin could ever live independently. Still, this small progress was a miracle for Christian and Justin's father. Previously, even with Christian's first-hand accounts, it took a lot to convince Justin's father, Professor Hubble, to let Jack take her to L.A. Professor Hubble, who had established a clinic and research institute for his daughter suffering from Asperger's syndrome, believed Jack was some sort of Eastern sorcerer, using mystic arts since science couldn't explain what he saw in Christian. Jack's approach to treating Justin had to differ from Christian's. Justin couldn't handle any kind of stimulation and had never left her small room at the research institute in over 30 years. So, Jack opted for a gentler method. After using acupuncture, healing technique, he employed psychological skills to infuse suggestions into her subconscious, guiding her into a meditative state. The results were still unknown. Right after hypnotizing Justin, Jack received a strange call. "Is this Officer Taver?" The voice on the phone belonged to a young woman. "Hello, who is this?" Jack hadn't seen the unfamiliar number before and asked politely. "I have your girl. Meet me at Rose Cemetery in an hour. Tell no one and come alone." The call ended abruptly. Jack's heart sank. His first thought was that something had happened to the Anderson family and someone had targeted Zoe again. But then, he doubted it. His relationships with Zoe and Maureen were kept well under wraps, and his official girlfriend, Hannah, was in Quantico. Who could kidnap someone from the FBI headquarters? After a brief moment of consideration, Jack ran to the garage and retrieved a business card from the glove compartment of his Chevy. The card was one Zoe had tossed in there after their last encounter, and it had Taylor's phone number, which matched the unfamiliar number. Taylor had been kidnapped. Rosalind had an accomplice outside, and her previous breakdown had all been an act. Damn, you can't trust the plot, it's gone completely off the rails. Need help?" Christian asked, noticing Jack's grim expression. "No, just take care of Justin. This isn't something you should get involved in." Jack quickly drove to the police station, making several calls along the way. As soon as he parked, Tim was already there, holding an FBI-issued tablet. "Hey, Jack, David Rossi wanted me to give this to you." Jack took the tablet and quickly explained the situation while tracking the locator signal. "Rosalind has an admirer outside who kidnapped Channel 8 News anchor Taylor, luring me to Rose Cemetery. Fortunately, I gave Taylor a locator. I'm going to rescue her. You go and handle the guy. If you can." Jack ran his finger across his throat in a slicing motion. Tim nodded, understanding. Jack grabbed the tablet and jumped into a police car, ready to go. Just as he was about to start, Angela opened the passenger door and got in. "What, trying to ditch your partner?" Jack felt grateful and forced a smile, handing her the tablet. "Thanks, partner. You navigate. We don't have much time." The last GPS signal from Taylor's device showed she was at a private farm in Kern County, about 60 kilometers away. The signal had vanished at 12:25 p.m., right before the kidnapper called Jack. If the kidnapper's methods were like Caleb White's, the signal likely disappeared because Taylor had been placed in an oil drum, creating a Faraday cage effect that blocked the signal. Jack didn't know how long someone could survive in an oil drum without suffocating, but the memory of the bloodied, scratched-up barrel he had seen at the old zoo filled him with anxiety. The sirens wailed as Jack sped down the highway, pushing the police car to over 160 km/h. The command center had already coordinated with the highway patrol to clear a fast lane for him. Chapter 97, What? First What? At the same time, Jack found himself reflecting deeply. The skills and attributes provided by the system had indeed pushed him beyond ordinary human limits. The attention from the women around him, the admiration from his colleagues at the police station, and even the recruitment offers from the IRS and the FBI all confirmed his growing strength. But somewhere along the line, he had started to drift away from his former cautious self, the one who held a deep respect for the world and approached it with humility. In the IRS case, where the undercover agent nearly died because he was fooled by a nurse's stellar performance, it was understandable, her acting had been superb. However, deliberately provoking Rosalind and arrogantly assuming he was immune to her retaliation. That was nothing but self-importance and stupidity. This world wasn't an RPG where he could rely on a guide to navigate through to victory. The people he interacted with, whether friends or criminals, were living, breathing individuals with their own thoughts and souls, not scripted characters following a predetermined path. Even if he was confident in his ability to handle threats, he should have considered the safety of those around him. Though his relationship with Taylor wasn't deep, if she had died at the hands of Rosalind's follower, Jack would find it hard to convince himself that he bore no responsibility for the tragedy. Fortunately, luck was on his side this time. The only tracking device he hadn't retrieved was still with Taylor. If things had played out as in the original plot, with Lucy being the one kidnapped, Jack couldn't begin to imagine the dire consequences. At that moment, David Rossi's voice crackled through the radio. "Jack, I just confirmed that the farm you're heading to is owned by a trust fund linked to Rosalind. Caleb White referred to it as a sanctuary in his diary. It's the place where Rosalind killed her first victim. We've also identified the kidnapper. Beth Whiston, who happens to be Rosalind's defense attorney. According to the TV station staff, Beth Whiston arranged to meet Taylor last night and drove her away after her shift." "You mean the upstanding lawyer Del Monte spoke so highly of?" Angela's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Rosalind is like a plague, spreading her twisted ideology to everyone she touches." Rossi was momentarily at a loss for words but then corrected himself. "I prefer to call it a mutual attraction between deviants. Del Monte just admitted that Beth Whiston insisted on representing Rosalind. Like Caleb White, she was drawn to her idol by choice. Anyway, Del Monte better brace himself for Judge Kelly's wrath. Taylor's father won't be taking this lightly." Jack swung the steering wheel hard, making the police car screech as it drifted onto a narrow path. "We're 3 minutes away. How long until backup arrives?" "The GPS signal's been gone for over 40 minutes, we need all the manpower we can get for a search." Captain Gray's voice came over the radio. "John and his team are right behind you, and more support will arrive in about 10 minutes. Additionally, I've called in 2 helicopters. They should be over your heads in about 5 minutes to assist with the search." With a long screech of the brakes, Jack brought the car to a stop and jumped out, eager to move. The farm wasn't large, with only a single flat building, the very place where Taylor's tracker signal had vanished. "Jack," Rossi called out again. "The tracker emits a low-frequency signal that might still be detectable, but its range will be very small." "Got it." Jack turned to Angela. "I'll go through the front, you circle around to the back. Be careful not to shoot the wrong person." Angela nodded and jogged to the back of the building, gun in hand. Time was of the essence, and Jack couldn't afford to worry about the potential danger of more of Rosalind's accomplices lurking around. Holding the tablet in one hand and his gun in the other, he kicked down doors as he advanced, relying on his heightened senses to detect any movement inside the rooms. However, when he and Angela met in the storage room at the end, they found nothing but empty space. The storage room contained only 3 empty oil drums and Taylor's abandoned Louis Vuitton purse lying on the floor. The two exchanged bewildered looks as Jack checked the tablet again, finding no signal. Just then, John and a squad of officers arrived, surrounding the building. "Could there be a basement or cellar?" Angela suggested. John shook his head. "I checked outside. There's no ventilation, and it doesn't look like there's a basement. No cellar entrances around, either." Jack stood at the door, staring at a set of tire tracks leading off into the distance, deep in thought. The radio crackled to life again, this time with Tim's voice. "Beth Whiston resisted arrest and was shot dead. I found a video on her phone that seems intended for you. Sending it over now." Jack pulled out his phone and watched the video Tim sent. It showed Taylor being forced at gunpoint into an oil drum buried in the ground. The drum's lid was then sealed, and shovelfuls of dirt covered it. "She's buried underground. Get in the car and follow those tire tracks." Jack signaled for everyone to follow and jumped back into the police car. He followed the tracks until Angela, clutching the tablet, suddenly exclaimed, "We have a signal. It's at 3 o'clock." They were on a small hill. Jack leaped out of the car, and his heightened senses quickly detected freshly disturbed soil nearby. "Over there." The group rushed over, some with shovels, others using their hands to dig frantically. Soon, a circular metal lid was exposed. Jack grabbed John's foldable shovel and pried the lid open in one swift motion, reaching inside to pull out an unconscious Taylor. #### divider. That was my first kiss. On the hospital bed, Taylor showed no signs of post-trauma shock. Instead, she wore a playful, extortionist expression. "That was CPR. If I hadn't done it, you'd be dead." Jack rubbed his temples, exasperated. After rescuing Taylor, he had used a healing technique on her. However, to maintain appearances, he had also performed a couple of rounds of CPR. He hadn't expected her to come out with such a comment. A nearly 30-year-old American woman playing coy like this. The whole scene felt absurdly out of place, as if it belonged in some old-school martial arts harem novel. "We're devout Catholics. My father would kill me if he found out." Taylor's eyes glistened as if she were about to cry. "Your first kiss was stolen by Hannah at your high school prom when you pulled a stunt to steal her crown." Jack shot back without mercy. Hannah had shared this little story between them long ago, spilling all the details during their daily video chats. "Okay, no more jokes. But I do want to thank you again. I was terrified, but I knew you'd come to save me." With that, Taylor pulled out the black circular tracking device. "Can I keep this as a memento?" Chapter 98, Maybe a part-time novelist. That's not possible. This belongs to the FBI, and I can't authorize giving it away. Please hand it back." Jack put on a stern face. Dealing with the 3 women at home was already headache-inducing. Although Taylor was attractive and had a nice personality, this wasn't some fantastical story where the protagonist hooked up with every woman he met. His healing skills were meant for serious purposes. Using them casually was only for the occasional fun, and his real focus was on improving his attributes. "Then come and get it yourself." Taylor pouted and teasingly attempted to stuff the small tracking device back into her cleavage. Jack's reflexes were sharp. Before the device could disappear into the depths, he deftly snatched it away. "Ahem. Get some rest." I need to get back to the station. Though Beth Whiston, the lawyer who had kidnapped Taylor, had dosed her heavily with sedatives, sparing her from much of the terror of being buried alive, Taylor's composure still amazed Jack. Most people in her situation wouldn't be so calm. Outside the hospital room, Judge Kelly was still berating Del Monte from the DA's office. Even though Jack was technically a hero for saving Taylor, it felt wrong to be caught in her room, potentially taking advantage of the situation. He left the room quickly, nodding to Carrie who was there for a visit, and hurried back to the station. Upon arriving at the station, he ran into David Rossi, who was about to leave. Jack offered to drive him to the airport. "Is there an urgent reason you're rushing back to Quantico?" Jack asked. "You don't know." Rossi looked surprised. "What?" "I just came back from the hospital." "What's happened?" Jack was puzzled. "Rosalind died in prison." "It's all over." Rossi shrugged, as if he'd seen such things many times before. Jack was at a loss for words. It wasn't surprising for someone who had tangled with the judicial system and ended up in prison to meet such an end. "That was fast," he finally remarked. According to Captain Hernandez from the California Women's Prison, there was a fight during the outdoor time, and Rosalind was accidentally injured, dying from a ruptured spleen. Dr. Brennan and her team are finishing up their work and will return to DC soon. The identification of the remaining bodies will be handed over to the LAPD. Detective Seeley Booth from the Major Crimes Unit isn't too happy with me for borrowing his Bones team. Jack felt a pang of regret. He had hoped to get closer to the Bones crew and maybe improve his forensic skills. Now, it seemed like that opportunity had slipped away, and who knew when he'd cross paths with them again. Rossi shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Didn't the IRS give you a bonus? Are you planning to get a new car?" Jack counted on his fingers. "The money should be coming through in a few days. John found me an '82 Pontiac Firebird that I like. I plan to bring it in for some custom modifications." Rossi, clearly unimpressed with American muscle cars, muttered under his breath, "I still prefer the Lancia Thesis." Jack silently pondered. Writing novels really seemed lucrative. Maybe he should follow in the footsteps of some of the time-traveling protagonists he admired, and repurpose stories like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants under a new guise. Who knows, he might even become a best-selling author in the US. ### divider. You paid $4,500 for this old heap and plan to install a 5.4-liter twin-turbo V8 engine. John was incredulous as he reviewed Jack's modification plans. "Do you know how much that engine costs?" $60,000. You could buy over 10 of these old things for that. Are you out of your mind? John knew Jack had come into a windfall, but seeing him splurge like this still made him cringe. After receiving the IRS bonus, Jack had gone all out. He wasn't satisfied with merely refurbishing the Firebird, he wanted to spend at least $100,000 to transform his childhood dream car with an entirely new core. For this, he bypassed the shop John had recommended and sought out a small studio run by former engineers from Shelby, Ford's specialty shop. Located near the LA Air Force Base, this studio was staffed by several retired engineers in their 50s and 60s who had honed their skills at Shelby. Though they primarily worked on Ford Mustangs, they also had extensive experience with Chevrolet vehicles. Given that the Pontiac Firebird shared a platform with Chevrolet, these seasoned engineers were happy to take on Jack's ambitious project, as long as the money was right. Apart from adding a red scanner light to the car's front grille, Jack insisted on preserving the Firebird's iconic look, including its pop-up headlights and triangular mirrors. Thus, the engineers custom-made 4 20-inch forged aluminum wheels that replicated the original Firebird's fiery design and upgraded the pop-up headlights with LED lights. The rest of the components were sourced from a Ford Mustang. This included an adjustable suspension system from Eibach, new leather sport seats, a complete electrical system, the dashboard, steering wheel, and all interior fittings, essentially adopting Shelby's Red Code kit designed for the Ford Mustang GT500. The V8 engine, as John mentioned, could produce up to 1,000 horsepower and 1,058 Newton-meters of torque on regular high-octane gasoline. If Jack opted for specialized ethanol fuel, the maximum output could exceed 1,300 horsepower. While this might not compete with million-dollar supercars, it was a radical transformation for the mid-range Pontiac Firebird, making it a thoroughbred beast. The entire modification was estimated to cost around $150,000, with delivery expected in 3 months. John, watching from the sidelines, was utterly numb. His fully loaded Toyota Tundra, priced just over $60,000, was barely the cost of Jack's new engine. After finalizing his car modifications, Jack returned to his regular duties. The remaining bonus money would be invested in the trading company Christian was setting up for him, as a way to legally minimize his tax obligations for the next filing season. Jack's treatment of Justin was also showing promising results. In just a week, she had started to stutter through conversations with Christian. While she still appeared nervous around Jack, she occasionally managed a smile or a gesture of gratitude. Then came the most perilous day of the year for the police, and for Jack personally, February 14th, Valentine's Day. As Captain Gray noted in the briefing, breakups, heartbreak, jealousy, revenge, love that soars to the heavens or crashes to the ground, all these elements make for the perfect storm. Chapter 99, Valentine's Mishap, Part 1. So, forget Black Friday and Christmas. It's unbelievable that Valentine's Day is actually the day with the highest crime rate of the year. Today, Angela was helping out in the detective squad, John was Jack's partner for the first time, and Lucy, unfortunately, was stuck with the front desk duty. How about we throw a party tonight? Jack was in a dilemma. He didn't know how to get through the night. It was easy enough to handle with Hannah not being around, a sweet video call would do the trick. But Maureen and Zoe had both hinted at wanting to spend Valentine's Day alone with him. You're both engaged, for crying out loud. You act all lovey-dovey in front of everyone, why do you want to spend the day alone? And with me of all people. Besides, Chris and Justin are staying at my place. Even if I manage to charm both girls, which house am I supposed to go to tonight? Maybe a Valentine's Day party with everyone is the way to go. I'll just see how things play out. Sure, we can have it at my place. It's about to be torn down for renovations anyway, so we can invite more people. No worries about making a mess. John pulled out his phone and started calling Gareth. Jack, meanwhile, began counting heads while driving. Angela and Wesley are a couple, John and Gareth another. Lucy and Tim could be considered a pair. Captain Gray will definitely bring his wife. In the eyes of others, Zoe and Maureen are undoubtedly together, which leaves just me. Oh, and Neela. I heard Neela might be getting back with her ex-husband. John's words shattered Jack's last hope. I hate Valentine's Day. 7A, 26 patrol car, single vehicle accident at 1530 Crescent Heights, injuries unknown. The call came from the dispatcher. The two men stopped joking. Jack seriously picked up the radio and replied, 7A, 26, en route. The accident site wasn't far from their patrol area. The dispatcher usually assigned the closest available unit. There it is. John pointed to a purple BMW near the intersection, its front end completely wrecked, having smashed into a wooden utility pole. Jack hit the brakes and parked the patrol car right in the middle of the intersection, the flashing lights signaling passing vehicles to drive cautiously around the accident scene. Dispatch, we're going to investigate on foot. John reported over the shoulder mic, location, 1530 Crescent Heights. Power lines are down. Notify the utilities department immediately. Jack grabbed John, who was about to approach the scene, and pointed to the power lines hanging over the car. Hold up. The car is electrified. If you touch it, we'll need 2 ambulances. Although the downed power lines weren't crackling with sparks like in the movies, they were still dangerous. Neither 220 volts nor 110 volts are safe to touch directly. Fortunately, the wires were only touching the car. The occupant inside was temporarily safe as long as they stayed put. Now wasn't the time to complain why LA, the second largest city in the USA, still used such fragile wooden utility poles. That's just part of the country's unique charm. Inside the car, a middle-aged blonde woman was beginning to regain consciousness and was trying to open the door. John shouted, "Ma'am, please stay inside the car. It's dangerous outside. She's not coherent. She can't hear you. Prepare for a rescue, I'll handle the wires." Jack pulled out his ASP baton. Unsure about the thin rubber grip, he wrapped it with his uniform jacket for extra insulation. Meanwhile, the blonde woman, seemingly dazed from the crash, didn't hear John's warnings. She had already opened the door, and as soon as her foot touched the ground, she convulsed from the electric shock. "Jack, we have to do something." John was frantic. Jack quickly stepped forward and used his makeshift insulated baton to lift the power lines, signaling John to pull the woman to safety. "Dispatch, we need an ambulance at my location." Adult female, mid-30s, unconscious, not breathing, suffered an electric shock. As Jack called for medical assistance, John laid the woman flat and began CPR. Remembering Taylor's unfortunate experience, Jack didn't join in the CPR after John completed 2 cycles. Instead, he discreetly touched the woman's arm to check her response. "Come on, you can do this." With John's efforts, the woman eventually started breathing on her own, though she was still groggy. "Hey, welcome back. You're safe now," John said with relief. "What happened?" "Stay still. You were in a car accident and got shocked." "The ambulance is on the way," John gently reassured her. "Did you save me?" "Thank you." The woman, teary-eyed, hugged John, almost ready to kiss him in gratitude. Yes, it was nothing." John awkwardly patted her back, unsure how to extricate himself without seeming rude. Jack, amused by the scene, almost whistled and walked away, glad he wasn't the only one facing a Valentine's Day ordeal. After the graceful blonde was safely loaded into the ambulance and the scene was managed, the 2 men got back in their patrol car. "A box of genuine Cuban Partagas, and I promise to keep this little incident from Gareth. She'll never know." Jack smirked, shifting into extortion mode. "Dream on. I'm down to my last box. I can let you have one tonight, but that's it." John's expression was pained as he fiddled with the 2 ugly bobbleheads on the dashboard, miniature caricatures of Hannah and Jack. These were Christmas gifts from Carla, the girl who had escaped from a serial kidnapper's lair. "Look, over there. Isn't that Carla?" Jack pointed across the street, driving leisurely. Carla, the little girl, was there with some Girl Scouts, selling cookies. They wore matching light pink uniforms and dark blue skirts, complete with light pink berets and red scarves. They looked absolutely adorable. "Oh, they're so cute. I've always wanted a sweet daughter like that." John grinned, his face wrinkling with a broad smile. "If you and Gareth keep trying, you might get lucky. Want to go say hi and buy some cookies? That way, you won't have to share your lunch with me." Jack parked and waved at Carla, who jumped up excitedly upon seeing him. As they prepared to cross the street, a man with dreadlocks suddenly dashed to the Girl Scout stand, grabbing several boxes of cookies. Carla kicked at his legs, but he wouldn't let go. "Police. Stop right there." Jack and John took off running. What kind of nutcase tries to rob Girl Scouts right in front of cops? Chapter 100, Valentine's Mishap, Part 2. Under the watchful eyes of the adorable Girl Scouts, John, usually not known for his athleticism, suddenly found a burst of energy. Despite stumbling a bit, he managed to keep up with Jack's pace. Jack, not exerting his full strength, kept one hand on his gun holster and his eyes fixed on the guy with dreadlocks, staying hypervigilant. Street patrols were unpredictable, who knew if some desperate person might suddenly pull out a makeshift weapon. Even so, the dreadlocked guy, floundering in his flight, was getting closer. When he looked back and saw the 2 officers just 5 meters behind, he panicked. Making a sharp turn to cross the street and hopefully lose them, he ended up running straight into a blue Honda Accord. With a long screech of brakes, the dreadlocked guy crashed through the windshield, half of his body plunged into the driver's compartment. He came out of nowhere. "I didn't mean to hit him." The female driver, visibly shaken, scrambled out of the car, terrified. "Dispatch, this is 7A26. We need fire and rescue at the intersection of Palmetto and Mateo Streets. The suspect's head is stuck in a vehicle's windshield. Please send help immediately." Jack called into the radio while checking the suspect's injuries inside the car. Blood was spurting rhythmically from his upper arm, a sign of arterial bleeding. It looks like his brachial artery was slashed by the glass. "Hey, stop moving, idiot. Without a tourniquet, you'll bleed out in minutes." Jack clamped down on the guy's arm, searching for something to use as a makeshift tourniquet. Such obvious external injuries made him wary of using any advanced first aid techniques. Here, use this scarf and this pen to make a tourniquet. Out of nowhere, an adorable little Girl Scout appeared, offering her red scarf and a pen. Tie it 5 centimeters above the wound, she continued. Jack quickly tied the scarf around the arm, knotted it, and used the pen to twist it tight, pressing the scarf deep into the flesh to stop the arterial bleed. Thank you, sweetheart. You just saved this moron's life. Jack high-fived the little girl with his clean hand. Can I get a Girl Scout badge for this? Jack, stumped, looked to Carla for help. After handling another accident, they said goodbye to Carla and her adorable troop, now with a few boxes of free cookies, and resumed their patrol. So, you really don't know anything about the Girl Scouts? John looked surprised. Jack gave him a sideways glance, thinking to himself that mentioning his childhood days with a red neckerchief was out of the question. Nope. All I know is that Girl Scouts sell cookies and Boy Scouts are currently embroiled in sex abuse scandals. John fell silent for a moment before grumbling, it wasn't like that back in my day. Feeling he might have been too harsh, Jack tried to explain, I didn't mean anything by it. My parents just never signed me up. John shook his head, indicating he wasn't offended. I only went to one summer camp and didn't even earn a badge. But these cookies are surprisingly good. Don't you want to try some? Jack offered, biting into one. John opened a box and raised his eyebrows, indeed. I might need to ask Carla for the recipe. Despite the cookies being delicious, Jack still generously shared the shumai he had made. The delicate dish consisted of braised beef brisket cut into small pieces, mixed with crunchy pickled bamboo shoots, and wrapped in glutinous rice soaked in the rich broth of the brisket. A thin layer of dough encased it all, shaped and steamed to perfection, creating a Chinese dim sum with a Western twist. Watching John eat the shumai with ketchup, Jack winced slightly. Though he hailed from a region known for its sweet cuisine, the American penchant for sugary additions was too much for him. While the beef broth had been sweetened with rock sugar, pairing shumai with ketchup felt utterly wrong to him. Sergeant Gray wasn't exaggerating when he said Valentine's Day was incredibly busy. By the time they'd dealt with 2 car accidents and written several more tickets than usual, they had just finished lunch and were chatting over cola when another call came through. 7A26 patrol car, respond to a suspected homicide. Husband returned home to find his wife unconscious and bleeding. Detectives are en route. Jack and John exchanged glances before Jack picked up the radio, 7A26, en route to assist. They quickly arrived at a high-end neighborhood. Just as they were about to knock on the door, Angela's patrol car pulled up. After a quick greeting, Jack drew his gun and knocked. LAPD, is anyone inside? Hearing faint sobbing from within, Jack tried the door handle. It opened easily, and he moved into the living room where the sound was coming from. John and Angela fanned out to check the rooms along the hallway. Clear. Clear. When they regrouped, Jack was already kneeling by a middle-aged white woman lying on the rug in front of the fireplace, her head and the carpet beneath soaked in blood. A man in his 30s or 40s, also white, sat nearby, hands covered in blood, crying uncontrollably. Sir. Angela called gently. Jack shook his head at his partners, signaling that the woman was beyond saving. It's Valentine's Day. I came home early to surprise her. What kind of monster would do this? The husband's voice was choked with tears, but anger seeped into his words as he spoke of the perpetrator. Not good at consoling people, Jack looked at John to handle it, while he called into the radio. 7A26 here. Victim is deceased. Please send additional units to follow up. Detectives are en route, the dispatcher replied. John and Angela tried to lift the distraught husband to his feet. Sir, let go and come with us. It took several calls before the husband responded. With their help, he finally stood, but not without a final, lingering touch of his wife's hand. They gently guided him to a nearby sofa. Unconcerned about his blood-covered hands, he held his face and sobbed. John, empathetic as ever, seemed unsure how to comfort him, while Angela continued softly coaxing him to leave the scene.